Price, 60 cents. All rights reserved. For sale by the same publishers. Paul Arène, The Canoe of the Six Captains, a volume in 16 from the collection of famous authors. Nouveaux Contes de Noël Arène. Paul Arène, New Christmas Tales. Paris C. Marpin E. Flammarion. Publishers, 26 Rue Racine, near the Odéons. Émile Collin. Lagny. A year. On Christmas Day, because of his great age. Gather round, my friends, and throw some pine cones into the fire so that the flames will light up. Good. Now make way for Barabbas. The faithful Barabbas is so cold that his groin is peeling and his stiff tail cannot twist any more. Printing Press, New Christmas Tales. The True Temptation of Saint Antoine, a Christmas tale dedicated to my little friends, Jean and Madeleine Dauphin. Saint Antoine opened the door, and saw in his hut a half-dozen tiny children, come from the village, despite the storm, to bring him honey and nuts, treats that the good hermit allowed himself once. So it is my temptation you want me to tell you about. Yes, good Saint Anthony. Yes, great Saint Anthony. The children coughed, blew their noses. Barabbas, for that is the true name that Saint Anthony's pig went by, Barabbas, with his hooves luxuriously furred in the hot ashes, grunted. The saint tugged at his cap, shook the snow from his shoulders, ran his hand over his beautiful gray beard where icicles hung, and having sat down, he began, My temptation? But you know it as well as I do. My temptation. D. Calat. As. It has been sketched and painted 1,000 times, and you can contemplate it on my wall, carefully collected. God forgive me this, perhaps vain habit. All the engravings, old or new, dedicated to my glory and that of Barabbas, from the Epinal illustration costing a sou, including the song, to the admirable masterpieces of Teniers, Bruegel, Anne. Your mothers have certainly taken you to see the Luxembourg Marionette Theatre, my poor hermitage as it is here, with the chapel, the hut, the bell suspended from the fork of a dead tree, and me in prayer while Proserpine offers me a cup and a bundle of imps, swinging at the end of a string, crash into each other in pursuit of the frightened Barab. Soon, too, when you follow school, which I hope will not be long, you will be able to read these words. The Temptation of Saint Anthony by M. Gustave Flaubert, inscribed in gold letters on the embossed back of a beautiful binding, through the windows of your father's library. That's why, my children, when it comes to revisiting such well-known events, I would really fear sounding repetitive. Saint Anthony. Oh, this Mr. Flaubert is a skillful man, though he doesn't write for small children like you, and, to my knowledge, he is quite precisely informed. On their part, the artists I spoke of just now have not forgotten any of the devils who tempted me at Tevels. Various times, they would even have added some. Great Saint Anthony. No. If I were to tell you something else? Temptation. Come. It was terrible nonetheless, isn't it, Barabbas? Let me ride for longer. For a long time it would have taken on the slope below which glows in a great hole, the fires of hell all open. On, said Anthony with a smile. I can see that I won't escape temptation this year either. But since you have been exceptionally wise, I will tell you one that no artist has painted, and Mr. Gustave Flaubert has not spoken of. In fact, during one such night, and on the occasion of New Year's Eve, the adventure befell me. My nights became peaceful. Eldon gown adorned with bright jewelry, graceful and majestic. At first, Barabbas, obviously interested, stood up on his 2 front legs to listen. The children shivered and huddled closer, and here is the Christmas tale that the kind hermit told them. So, my friends, you will imagine that after 1,000 successive temptations, the devils suddenly ceased to tempt me. And I thought, all is well, Antoine. The devils have given up. No more griffin monsters and horned beasts carrying me aloft on their wings like mice. No more hell's minions with goat beards and monkey snouts. No more fantastical musicians attempting to scare Barabbas with their bellies made of a double bass and noses that splay out sounding like an unbelievable clarinet. No more Queen Proserpine and her go. Barabbas and I lived happily on our rock as much as one can be. This lasted for 6 months and more. The 6 beautiful months of solitude. Barabbas went, came, followed me everywhere, edifying me with his purity and delighting me with his childlike joys. I did what every good hermit does. I prayed, rang my bell at the desired hours, and in between exercises and prayers, I drew water, from my source to water, in a sheltered hollow, the vegetables of my garden. I fell asleep in confidence, but, to my misfortune, evil was watching. One day, as Christmas approached, I was sunbathing in front of my door when a man appeared. Supply yourselves with pins. He had nailed boots, a strong staff, a square-cut velvet coat. He carried on his back the ball of hooks and shouted, "Pins, pins," with a slight Auvergnat accent. "Do you need a pin, good hermit? Go your way, brave man. I live on clear water and roots, and I have no use for your pins." That's all right. Let's not get angry. We pack up our goods." Yet, he added with a diabolic look, showing me Barabbas, who, more perceptive than me, grumbled furiously in a corner. Yet, this one seemed to me shining and fat with abundance, and I thought, God forgive me, that you intended him for the next New Year's Eve. The fact is that this scoundrel Barabbas, since the devils no longer troubled his digestion, had put on a cheerful fatness. I suddenly noticed this, but to eat my only friend, there was still a long way to go. I dreamed of brooches, I saw brooches, so when I saw the porter descending the path, looking dejected, with his brooch in hand, thinking of the idea he had had to wake me up with Barabbas's body, I couldn't help but laugh. In vain I multiplied mortifications and penances. Penances and mortifications did nothing. However, little by little, like a bad weed that spreads, this infernal idea, for it was obviously a devil from hell who, disguised as a peddler, had wanted to sell me a brooch, took root within me, and fasting itself only excited my appetite. No! But I believe, my children, that this does not greatly interest you, and perhaps I was fleeing from Barabbas. I dared not bring him along on my quests, and when I returned, wagging his tail, he affectionately rubbed against my bare feet with the rough hairs of his back. I quickly averted my gaze and did not have the heart to pet him. Good Saint Anthony. Continue, great Saint Anthony. So, I shall continue, though it costs me to awaken such painful memories. What temptations! What trials! The devil, to lead the creature astray, sometimes uses the most innocent things. This was our favorite evening stroll, when the sun was setting and the oak leaves smelled good. Near my hermitage, there was a small wood. I believe that if one looks well, one could still find some trees, where brave people allowed me to take Barabbas for a walk. Truffles, perhaps, St. Anthony. There, I was reading, and Barabbas was gorging himself on acorns, and often, tilling the moist earth beneath the fallen leaves with his groin, he would bring up some knotted, fragrant black balls, which he would crunch with pleasure. Oh, yes, my little friends, truffle is a cryptogam that I had scorned until now, but whose memory suddenly came back to me, exact and enticing. So from that moment on, every time Barabbas unearthed a truffle, I would strike it with a firm stick onto the flat of his groin, hypocritically throwing 2 or 3 chestnuts in its place to keep the poor man from losing heart. St. Anthony! I gathered several books' worth. And you wanted to truffle Barabbas's feet? Not yet fully decided. I confess that I was vaguely thinking about it. Next to my door, the hermit continued after a pause. A plant brought by the wind had sprouted between the sharp rock and the wall. Its long, gray-green leaves smelled good, and in its small purple flowers bees would roll around in the spring. I loved this humble plant that seemed to have bloomed only for me. I watered it, took care of it, and brought some earth all around it. But alas! One morning, as I was breaking off a sprig with my fingernail, I had a quick and tempting vision of pork quarters roasting on a spit, and drenching the grass sprigs planted in a diagonal within the flesh, which sizzled and curled up. But I should not have been so cheap. Shame on me. I pulled up my sage and gave all my truffles at once, in a bowl, to Barabbas, who feasted on them. My plant, my humble little plant, it was sage dear to cooks, and its beloved scent no longer evoked images of feasting and roasted pig within my soul. With the sage pulled out, the truffles thrown away, my temptations persisted. They even became more frequent and irresistible as Christmas approached. What a procession, my friends! Put yourselves in my place, with a robust stomach still, barely nourished for years by saltless vegetables watered with clear water. What I saw passing at the foot of my rock, on the great road leading to the city, was well suited to damn someone saintlier than me. And it sounded, clanged, trumpeted, babbled, gobbled, a noisy din that always dominated, the supreme temptation. The people of the place, faithful Christians, prepared their midnight mass 8 days in advance, and from morning until night there were countless processions of provisions, loads of deer and wild boars, tied-up lobsters, full baskets of fish, oysters in buckets, chickens and roosters hanging head down on the mules' backs, fat sheep destined for slaughter, ducks and guinea fowl, the white flock of geese honking, the black flock of turkeys rustling their violet throats, not to mention the countrywomen carrying in baskets fruits from the orchard ripened on the straw, fresh-kept grapes, winter melons, eggs and milk for creams, honey and cakes and jars, cheeses and dried figs. The desperate cries of some pig tied by the leg, pulling at its handler and roaring as it pulls on its rope. Finally, Christmas arrived. The midnight mass said at the hermitage, and all the attendees having left, I locked the chapel with a key and quickly barricaded myself in my cabin. It was cold, cold like today. The north wind blew and snow covered the fields and roads. I heard laughter and singing outside. It was my parishioners, well wrapped up, going to celebrate in the neighborhood. I looked through the crack in the panel. Here and there, in the white plain, clear lights shone from farm windows, and over there, the illuminated city reflected a giant furnace in the sky-red sky. It was the hour that the tempter had been waiting for. With a meager root and a jug of water freezing, suddenly a sadness overcame me. I exclaimed, "What a revelry!" and could not hold back my tears. Then I remembered the revelry of my gluttonous youth, the great-grandfather presiding over the table and pouring new wine on the large cauldron. I saw the sizzling dishes, the white napkin, the flame dancing in the faience and tin pots on thin pots, sideboard, and found myself thus alone with Barabbas, while everyone was celebrating around a meager fire. For a few moments, a tremor of invisible wings rose and grew in the silence of the night. "Damn it!" A burst of laughter echoed through the air, and little knocks, discreetly struck, resounded on my shutter and door. "Hi, Barabbas!" I cried, and Barabbas, who had good reasons not to like devilry, took refuge behind the oven. The roof tiles were ringing as if under hail. Once again, around my poor cabin, the infernal band was unleashed. But here's the strangest part. G sharpened, pots scrubbed, bottles emptied, glasses filled, forks pricking plates and skewers jingling, asking to be oiled. Instead of the terrifying noises and discord that my enemies usually made, nightbirds' cries, goat bleating, bones clattering and iron chains rattling, it was gentle sounds this time, at first vague like those a frozen traveler hears emanating from a smoky, close inn, but as they grew clearer, they merged into a wonderful melody of tools being. I already thought I was breathing soot and sulfur. Suddenly, the music stopped. A violent shock made my cabin's walls tremble. The window opened, the door fell, and as wind rushed in, my lamp went out. Far from it. The infernal wind arrived this time loaded with pleasant scents and smelled of caramel and cinnamon. Since the wind entered, it became very warm in my cabin. And, forgetting myself, I prayed to heaven to grant my companion the strength to endure the trial. At one point, I heard someone cry Barabbas. They'd found him in his hiding place. "Come on." "Good," I said to myself. "Here are the old jokes starting again. They're going to attach another firework to his tail. These gentlemen demons are not very creative." But as he cried out louder and louder, I dared to open my eyes, and suddenly my lamp lit up, and I saw the unfortunate martyr held by the tail and ears, struggling in the midst of a circle of white devils. White devils? St. Anthony? Yes, my friends, white devils in the whitest white, I assure you, disguised as butlers and cooks with short vests and berets. They wielded lardoirs and maneuvered in the air, astride frisks. Near the board, a large knife, a bucket, a small broom, a sponge. However, in the middle of the house, on two stools, they had placed a long board and laid Barabbas upon it. Barabbas was screaming, and I realized the devils were going to bleed Barabbas. What a perdition is gluttony, I said to myself. Since he's dead, as long as the blood flowed and Barabbas screamed, I felt some emotion in my soul. But once Barabbas fell silent, bah! And it was with guilty calmness, and even with a certain interest, that I saw, between the hands of the infernal cooks, the innocent Barabbas, my dear companion in solitude, cruelly manipulated and wonderfully transformed into a heap of delicious things. With a bed of burning embers, devils, alas! I saw him grilled and scraped, hanging by his feet along a ladder. Opened lengthwise, emptied, washed, white as a lily and already smelling good in the steam of boiling water, then sliced, chopped, salted, meat for pâté, meat for sausages, all this, with a speed, a dexterity devilish, so that in the blink of an eye, the stone of my hearth cover never lacked. I was surrounded by pots full, griddles loaded, skewers garnished where, among fragrant fumes like amber, in brown juices and sauces like gold, sang, sizzled, quivered, the charcuterie remains of what was once my friend. Suddenly everything changes. What a sight! A palace instead of a shack. No more cooking or embers. The crumbling wall is lined with paneling. The beaten floor is covered with carpets. There is everything on that table. Only the roof tiles keep their holes. but these holes transform into a wonderful trellis of light, running across the golden ceiling, and letting, through its cuts, the blue of the sky and the stars. I once admired such beauty in a rich man from the city to whom I preached repentance. Ah! And through these holes, a legion of little waiters carrying plates climbed up and down, winding themselves among the leaves, hanging from the brittle vines, clinging to the brittle vines, clinging to the velvety buds, embracing the clusters with their tiny arms, sliding along the green shoots, and covering a table where I sat with cooked delicacies. My friends, just thinking about it makes my mouth water. Heaven! What was I going to say? But did you eat them? Great Saint Anthony! Nevertheless, with my mouth open, my nostrils dilated, I admired that under the silk of a humble animal so many savory things could have ripened, and I softened at the memory of Barabbas. Almost, my friends, I almost did. No, just thinking about it. Remorse came to my heart. 4 hams, 2 large, 2 small, 4 truffled feet, a single trottle, but so well fed on pistachios, pâté, rosy galantines under their amber caps trembling, delicate anuillettes twisted anuillettes, sausages, black boudins like hell. Then the roasted ones, the chopped meats, the sauces. The fork entered. The devil smiled. Go away, go. Already I was piercing my fork into the crispy skin of a boudin that a very polite devil presented to me. Go, Satan, go back. I just recognized the smile of the infernal little bag, cause of all my temptations, who, 2 months ago, had offered me a brooch to buy. And then? Asked the children, delighted by such a beautiful tale. The Jar of Honey, by Theodore de Bonville. Then, repentant and with a heavy heart, I shared my meal of roots with Barabbas, and since then the devils have never disturbed our Christmas again. The vision faded, the small light dimmed, my fire was fully extinguished. Barabbas, kind and robust, shook his bell, and instead of a circle of white devils, snowflakes as big as a fist, penetrating through the door and shutter that had been thrown open by the storm, swirled in the frozen wind. Arjoram, whose mountain scent so penetrating when the plant is harvested green, would struggle to compete with the scent of honey itself. Tay honey sold by Greek spice merchants on Dar Street in Marseille, sacrilegiously. It is not, dear master, the jar that the Red Riding Hood carried for Grandmom on the day that the wolf encountered it, but another jar of honey in our native coarse clay, glazed inside and adorned along the edges with a few drips of enamel, a modest, rural amphora that must have reached you by postal package these past days. Packaged in fresh maw, solid and granulated, and comparable, except for the color, to falern that the old Romans cut into slices before dissolving it in snow, solid enough not to melt even during the hottest summers, granulated to snap under the tooth. This honey so sweet that its intense sweetness has a burning sensation. You've surely reminded of the classic Heimat, in ordinary silver tin boxes, made. Now, I want to reveal to you, for there is always a reason for things, why this honey does not resemble any other honey, and why it escaped when you lifted the lid, a flight of idyllic visions that immediately found themselves at home in your Parisian and Greek house, hidden in the tranquility of the old oaks on the old Jardinette Street. This honey cost me nothing, or so little that it is almost nothing. The reason, dear master, is as follows. This honey, such as Rothschild would never have on his table, this delicious ambrosia made from the nectar of all flowers, this fluid gold and divine sweetness that one would have to pay for as if it were real. Gold was not, as you might believe, a gift from me, but a gift that you yourselves, the bees. Once, on the first beautiful days, the woman would bring it to us. But now she is too old, and how far is the Mas des Truffes? One day, Antoinette said, "Here comes the season. If you wish, one of these mornings we will go to the Mas des Truffes." For what purpose? To replenish our honey supply. But it is best to simply tell you the story, which, although it is from yesterday and has arrived in France, takes us back to the simplicity of those primitive ages when, on pure earth, without ambition or needs, happy and good as gods, men lived in us, harmony with nature. No, just 2 small leagues, halfway up Loire. There was certainly food for thought for a Parisian. 2 small leagues uphill, and one knows how these small leagues stretch once you've started. But we remember having been a mountain dweller, and what a beautiful opportunity to renew our acquaintance with the mountain, through the 1,000 changes that, from olive trees whose leaves are already silvered, and early blooming almond trees, led you, through imperceptible transitions, to the shaded slopes of oak trees, the thickets of large fr. So I accepted the walk. Oz and Buxus, the extensive plains of lavender, and the summits that are only brightened by the immobile green of juniper bushes. The bed of a torrent serves as a path, then it becomes a rocky, winding way, similar to the bed of the torrent, a path that never seems to end at the steep slopes of the coast where the schist of the avalanches typically breaks apart under the sun, but is wet and black this morning, for it rained all night. Black with a velvet-like pattern here and there marked by the suddenly gushing stream's luminous ribbon. And all along, I kept thinking, certainly, the road is picturesque, but what a peculiar idea for Aunt to go looking for her honey so high up. We arrive at a sheltered bend with some traces of cultivation, a meadow, a grove, a hidden oasis as if cleared long ago by farmers in these forgotten places, while the Lord kept only the lush lands of the valleys for himself, and little by little, since the sales during the Revolution and the division of the grand estates, they have been abandoned. In the middle, the Mas des Troupes, a strange building made of rolled pebbles, without plaster, with a red sandstone cordon outlining the angles of the walls, the frames of the narrow windows, and the arched door, like snowflakes of golden snow. Next to the mass there is a fountain with 2 nozzles from which water falls loudly into a tank that overflows, and behind it, stacked on a naturally cut limestone block in a series of steps, there are about 100 beehives, hollow tree trunks, covered in tilosol, around which, buzzing in the sun, swirl countless bee swarms, moving and pressing. The old woman, followed by a hen, cautiously advanced. "You almost scared me. I took you for a bailiff. So you have some lawsuit?" Fortunately, I recognized Mademoiselle. "No, but one is never sure when they are poor." "How so?" "Poor? With all these beehives? Ah, my poor gentleman, if only you knew how little it amounts to. Indeed, poverty, decent poverty, could be read at a glance in every corner of the humble home. The pots weighed, the money counted, and Annette took out some small gifts from a basket whose contents intrigued me. The old woman served us on a very white tablecloth a snack of black bread, nuts, and clear water. Then we set off for several pots of honey that a man working higher up in the woods would bring us next Saturday, as he went to sell his bundles in town. "Here! This is a woolen cap for you and a knife with several blades for your young man who has become a shepherd." She hesitated, yet with an infantile desire to accept. A wet and fleeting reflection, that's how one cries at 70 sown in the old woman's eyes as she turned, handling the knife back and forth, and slowly feeling the warm fabric with her wrinkled hands. "You are good people. The little hat would keep me warm this winter, and Cadet would be happy. The bees have nothing to do with it, but I'd be too afraid of the bees. Take it, but take it for your bread and nuts. It's outside the price of honey. It's for your bread and nuts." We were already at the end of the field, and the old woman repeated again, "For the bread and nuts, that's right. Otherwise, the bees would be disappointed." After she left us, a lot of mystery for the purchase of a few unfortunate pots of honey. Will you explain to me, Antoinette, what this old woman means with her story about bees being upset? "How? You don't know?" "But it's the local belief. Bees, everyone here will tell you, possess the gift of wisdom and have a great hatred for money and greed. They are willing to serve humanity, but not to be exploited. They also do not allow the price of their honey to be changed, which must always remain the same as it was set in ancient times. And if anyone, out of a desire to make too much money, should dare to increase it, even by 1 sow, it would not be long before the bees swarmed away far, and left the miser alone to lament his empty hives. Isn't this, my dear master, a touching superstition and an admirable lesson? Not only for the apothecaries who, without fear of seeing their sophisticated pots fly away by breaking the window displays, will unfortunately continue until the end of the centuries to mix glucose with honey, but for all humanity. Retrospective Christmas. I celebrated Christmas, I confess, a Christmas that could have been called Christmas. Car in the midst of shameful negotiations where they are prostituted, amidst the noise of ekias sifted and stirred to deafen them. It is to be feared that the last consolatory gods we have left, namely art and love, will flap their wings one beautiful evening and soar straight up to heaven, indignant, like bees, to fruits like ice pearl, and every time a couple passed under the mistletoe, the rider had the right to kiss his dancer. We had, God damn it, eaten pudding as a family. On every table shone bright, new volumes of a correctly British coloration. At the corner of every fireplace, scratching the enamel of the petitions, stood bouquets of holly. At every door, chandelier, hung sprigs of mistletoe with their hard, parasitic foliage punctured by transparent and why. Another custom from across the channel, as explained to me by a scholar. The custom is certainly polite, I wouldn't deny it. However, A background of patriotism protests within me against this invasion of foreign manners. Back in the village. And since today's wealthy want to try, not without reason, to introduce some pittoresque into life, they would do better simply to return to our old provincial France, which also has its old and touching usages, whose wavering tradition is already at risk of dying out if we don't take care. I was pondering these things the other late night in the midst of the crowd soften the same ones who emerged from the darkened low porch of a church, or gathered noisily and joyfully in front of dazzling restaurants flooded with gaslight, crammed with gaslight, provisions. And, aided by the melancholy of the hour, I recalled other Christmases far from Paris. In the village, well in advance, Christmas is announced by all sorts of signs and predictions that everyone understands without needing to be an astrologer. The pig, already fat under its roof, lives surrounded by gastronomically affectionate care, like on the Society Islands, a relative whose succulent inheritance is expected. As soon as the first frosts on the noisy and white road, countless flocks of turkeys began to pass, coming from nowhere, led who knows where. Every household buys its own, which will be fed in a corner of the courtyard, and which, stuffed with sound and nuts, with its stupid temper tantrums, its loudly spread wheel, the strange decoration that wobbles around its beak, appears to children's ravioli. Eyes like a giant fantastic bird, for the poor reserved in as many pieces as there are guests. On St. Barbara, 21 days before Christmas, in 3 chosen plates from the most beautiful on the sideboard, a few grains of wheat were spread out, which, carefully watered and kept warm in the corner of the fireplace, do not take long to sprout without soil or sun, which we found miraculous. These 3 plates, tiny fields of green wheat, symbolizing spring and the hopes of the new year, are intended to be displayed along with the 3 lights whose flame, depending on the side it inclines, points to who must be in the table for the grand feast, between the family nougat and the calenda bread that a prudent hand will cut, the portion. However, little by little, the wheat grows, and at first white and pale, it gradually turns green. The days pass, the moment approaches, it's time to prepare the feast. Sparks of all its flaming mosses while the assistants sing, "Joyful, joyful, Christmas makes us joyful." One morning, the servant went into the woods. He mysteriously brought back the log chosen long ago by the mistress, which had been placed on the sleds by the ancestor and the youngest child of the house, poured with pure wine in memory of ancient Till. Libations will suddenly catch fire and be enveloped, like a vibrant golden embroidery, in the 1,000. For children, the nativity scene is the big deal. Now, Christmas can come. There's barely anything left to do but take care of the nativity scene. In towns, nothing could be easier. Nativity scenes are found there, or almost all of them crafted. In the villages, it's different. Although at this time Marseille, along its course, Belzunce, like Paris along its boulevards, displays a double row of stalls where, instead of toys and Christmas objects, they sell foliage, green moss, cardboard mountains, gold paper for the stars, blue thick paper for the sky, and small shiny molded figurines with the varnish of their new coal. So we go to the mountains. You can imagine what joy. Each family has at the back of a cupboard its collection of Santons, a naive representation of the characters from our old Christmas airs are renewed a little every year, and some of which date back sometimes to a century. But for the rest, one must be resourceful, Turanian, seeking plants, lichens, rough stones and moss, bark curiously contorted, all the elements and reliefs of a complex landscape, not unlike the backgrounds Leonardo da Vinci, imitating the primitives, placed behind his Mona Lisa, and which, behind his Mona Lisa, and which, bridges, torrents, jagged peaks from which Don Cesar could in the distance contemplate your azure, O Medi, Al Palestine. Through it all, people and livestock make their way, returning from the fair, pushing mules, sheep, and goats, a population of villagers and shepherds. For it is to Don Cesar of Ruy Blas, and not, as I had imagined, under the influence of an academic cerebral abscess, that this admirable line belongs, from Scapin's Forbury's Dinarina deep valleys, brigand caves, hermit chapels, farms, castles, villages, all skillfully dusted with a layer of flour to mimic snow, pretends to depict some chimeric. Indeed, here, as in the pastorelle which is only an animated and brought-to-life crèche, the nativity takes up little space and serves barely as a pretext. And this is, in a sense of innocent realism, the entire dreamed-of drama of the journey to Bethlehem, from the incredulous farmer grumbling to his neighbors to wake him up for the big news, to the arrival at the stable, and the humble gifts offered, to the child Jesus who, half-naked, shivers among the cow and the donkey. In Provence they always play the pastoral, the last surviving mystery, but alas, it is sacrilegally beheaded. The important thing is the tragicomic odyssey, rich with allusions and Gallic touches, of a band of peasants traveling to an unknown land amid adventures such as Labiki could have drawn inspiration from, for his Monsieur Perrichon, and Verne for his Monsieur Perrichon. Journey around the world in 80 days. Alas, towards the end of the empire, an enemy prelate of the picturesque had Pistachier suppressed. Once Pistachier, a puppet close to Caribou's, was the protagonist, Pistachier, a jack-in-the-box who could bring joy with improvised jokes in the Marseillais district of Saint-Jean, where Latin gave way to honesty in even the most dramatic situations. The burro still follows the caravan, gambling and roaring loudly, its proud and joyful braying when it sees a donkey, a fellow near the cradle where Jesus sleeps. But Pistachier has not reappeared, not even since the Republic, and France lost a traditional mask that Italy could have envied. The pastoral and pistachio have made us forget the crèche that is still incomplete, as the kings will not arrive for 12 days. But isn't this religion of the people touching? In essence, what the people see in the naked child suffering from hunger and cold is themselves. Will they leave him abandoned? The poor, the shepherds, came first. They did all they could, but their goodwill cannot be enough. Now it is the turn of the magi, the rich, the powerful, the philosophers. They are on their way behind the star, Melchior with Balthazar, and the good Negro in the red cloak. Will they bring in their golden censer something to heal human misery? For 1,000 years the world has waited, and true Christmas has not come, and still the ox gores, and still the ass gores, in vain exhausting their warm breath into the mist, and still the deadly winter wind rages in the doorless stable where snow falls through the holes in the roof. The old woman was making a bundle to heat her hut and cook her dinner. The good guy, after the long wind had blown, the forest paths, when morning came, were strewn with dead branches, and here and there also with strips of holly torn from those round balls of thick green that appear in autumn on the bare treetops, looking like a pigeon's nest. 2 women were in the woods, one old, so old that her face and hands seemed leathery and harsh, the other young and so beautiful that nothing in that season could suggest such beauty, since there was no more fresh grass or lilies whose white could compare with hers, nor wildflowers of her eye color. For beautiful ivy, here's some fine ivy, exclaimed the old woman. The young one, as a distraction, picked up and tied with a ribbon the ivy that lay on the ground. Oh, so it happened that, while one was joking, the other making a bundle, they met just at the crossroad of the hermits, near the great block of granite, in the middle of which, where a fallen cross once stood, there is now a hole always filled with water where young birds come to drink. So what are you going to do with all this ivy? The young girl hesitated to answer, for, in her tattered clothes, with her cunning gaze, the old woman with the firewood had at first struck her as some witch. But these tattered clothes were so clean, and that malice was clearly mixed with so much kindness, that having gained confidence, "Here," she said, "is what it's about. I am Guillemette, the daughter of Master Guillaume, who has his farm over there, beyond the bridge when you go to the village, at the place where the road turns. Oh, a rich house indeed, a rich and blessed one. Anyone who is poor knows it, since alms have been given from it for so long. Now listen, my dear old woman, and since the occasion arises, don't refuse me a piece of advice. There is someone I love, and who has promised me marriage. He loves me too, yet he doesn't hurry much. When we pass beneath the holly, you know that love is doubled and we will get married in the year. As my fiancé has to be at the party and drive me to midnight mass, we will pass underneath together. So this morning, seeing so much beautiful holly on the grass and moss left untied, the idea came to me to make a bouquet which, on Christmas Eve, without anyone knowing anything about it, I will hang on our door." I know, muttered the old woman. "But we are not at Christmas. There are 2 good months missing. Who cares? I'll have provisions made. Holly lasts for years. It won't wither for 2 months." The old woman started laughing. "For beautiful holly, here's some really beautiful holly, well-flowered, well-branched, thick leaves, red like gold. Only perhaps it's a little young. Its seeds are still green. You shouldn't pick holly too early, nor take the one that gets broken by the wind. Irrel. Youth does not believe this. For holly to be good and bring luck to lovers, it must have endured winter, cold and frost, and cling so strongly to the tree that when you pull it off, the bark comes with it. However, there is good holly and bad holly, just as there is love and love. However, there is good holly and bad holly." Guillemette was already far away, but the old woman still repeated, while reloading her bundle, "For beautiful holly, here's beautiful holly." The following year, at the same place, near the fallen cross of the Hermit's Crossroads, the old wood-hunter and Guillaumet met again. It wasn't like before, in the autumn, but on the eve of Christmas. Frozen grass crackled underfoot, frosted dew hung from the trees, and large snowdrifts remained on the sides of the paths where the sun seldom reached. The old woman, perhaps because of the snow, had not bundled up that day. With her scythe in hand, she laboriously gathered a great bundle of fresh holly. She recognized Guillaumet and noticed she was crying. "Hey! So, little girl, let's dry these eyes. It would be a sin to let them melt." "Alas, my good old friend, though it serves little purpose, I will tell you of my sorrow. Everything seemed to go well at first. Last year, if you remember, I hung mistletoe on our door, so that passing under it with my beloved, his love would double and decide him to marry me. As soon as he stepped onto the threshold, he saw the mistletoe and kissed me. Then, after midnight mass, before we sat down to dinner, he took my father aside and asked for my hand. Let's wait till the end, Guillaumet. The banns were about to be published. We had already hired the minstrels for the wedding. But that was too much happiness. Then what? One night, the river overflowed, drowning fields, meadows, ruining 3/4 of our farm, and leaving us despairing. Then, said Guillaumet, whose apron was wet with tears, then, seeing me poor, my fiancé left, and despite searching everywhere for him, we never heard from him again. I warned you, Guillaumet, don't trust the mistletoe. Young woman. And then, men are so treacherous. So you still love him? No, of course not. Yet you're crying. I'm crying my humiliation, but one only loves those who love them. In that case, said the old woman, laughing, be careful, beautiful Guillaumet. Yes, I know someone. Someone? Someone, no matter how old we are, our eyes can still see, someone who has loved you for a long time, even if you never really paid him any mind, and he continues to love you, unbothered by whether or not your dowry went down the river. The neighbor's son, Dr. Why are you blushing, Guillaumet? Isn't he supposed to spend Christmas with you tonight? Here, try, if your heart permits, to have him be the gallant who leads you to Mass at midnight. So, sighed Guillaumet, in case my heart tells me yes, perhaps you would do well to sell me a few sprigs of your mistletoe? They are, my dear, red as gold, with grains in a chain more clear and whiter than white pearls. Fine holly, well pruned, well clear, not deceiving. For see, this holly has endured the winter, braved cold and frost, and did not fall at the first wind. But keep your money, Guillaumet. My holly is not for sale today. It belongs to the neighbor's son who kept it from me yesterday. And the old woman, laughing as she plucked 2 chosen strands, murmured, I told you so, Guillaumet. There is holly and holly, just as there is love and love. But I can't remember where we were. The Gospel according to St. Perrault, then, continued Simonette, after shaking her heavy with ideas blonde head from side to side in an impatient gesture. We were at the most beautiful part when the 3 Marquis of Carabas arrived, on camels, to visit little Jesus in his manger. This is it, the 3 Marquises of Carabas. But I have to start over. Take, then, innocent soul, Simonette, she will be 4 years old next lilac, started over this amazing story, where the gospel, Mother Goose, the blue fairy tales of the nanny, and the lessons of the good priest mixed together in the whims of a child's imagination. Little Jesus was very cold, lying in the manger, on straw, and he might have died without the ox and the ass who blew. Your time, start over, Simonette. And while Sir played his part with the good priest, Madame read, and the nanny dozed off listening to the fire, for the cat and for me, especially for the cat who, having left the warm spot in the ashes, came to sit on the table and seemed to approve with its purring, for the cat and for me, listeners with an eye. He was rather poor, little Jesus. But behold, one fine day a sound of trumpets and music was heard in the air. The Marquises of Carabas are always very rich. These were the 3 Marquises of Carabas who arrived, guided by the star. These gave little Jesus a pot of butter, a cake, all sorts of precious treasures, and also a nice red drape hat to protect him from the sun when summer came. No. And little Jesus said, when I grow up, I will distribute my treasures to everyone, so that no child or old person on earth will ever be cold again as I was. But the lord of the land, a giant called Bluebeard, became jealous of little Jesus and sent bad men from all sides to find and kill him. And then Then Mary with Joseph put little Jesus on the donkey, and took them far, very far, into the mountains of Egypt, and then— Here Miss Simonette hesitated. Her squinted eyes and furrowed brows testified to the intense inner turmoil taking place in her mind. Finally, after a few seconds of effort, she laughed at the chat, reassured, and continued with the tale. Mary and Joseph had left Grandmom in the village because she was quite old and could no longer walk. He thought, "This way I will remember my path and be able to return to embrace Grandmom." Little Jesus therefore stopped near a stream, and filled his pockets with white pebbles that he scattered along the road. One day, while his parents were sleeping and the donkey was munching on grass tied to a tree, little Jesus grabbed the jar of butter and the biscuit from the pack, put on his red hat, and set off. "Where are you off to, little Jesus, with that pretty red hat?" "I am going to carry this pot of butter and this crepe to Grandmother, and I took the path through the forest because there are evil men on the road, sent by the ogre to kill me." After walking and walking, when he reached the forest, little Jesus encountered a brother wolf, a completely black wolf wearing boots, and thanks to those boots, the wolf could run 7 leagues with every step. Na, Ted, what to diash? Oh. The wolf wanted to eat little Jesus first, but he dared not because of a tree feller passing by, armed with his axe. The wolf asked again, "And is Grandmother far away?" "Yes, she lives beyond the mill you see over there, in the first house of the village." Little Jesus, who was hungry, picked strawberries from the grass and blackberries from the hedges. He did not want to touch either the crepe or the pot of butter he reserved for Grandmother. Thereupon the wolf resumed his trot, stretching his boots that went on for 7 leagues, and little Jesus remained alone, quite happy that the wolf had left. They had a lot of fun in this forest. It was beautiful, like at the bottom of a park. Everywhere the birds were singing. There were flowers, butterflies, and large lizards embroidered with pearls that rustled the dry leaves. Little Jesus ran after the butterflies and made bouquet with the flowers. He tried to stroke the large lizards, but immediately the large lizards escaped. Then he saw Prince Charming pass by wearing a sun-colored garment and Sleeping Beauty in her moon-colored dress. So little Jesus— No, little foot. Come on, Simonette, you're getting confused. He also met fairies packing their bundle of dead branches, and he played for a long, long time with the 7 children that the woodcutter and his wife would lose. "I'm not getting confused," replied Simonette, even if little Jesus, because of all this playing, had finally forgotten Grandma. When he thought about it, night had fallen, and everything was already quite dark, near the mill, passing through the lock bridge. Little Jesus hurried, but the wolf had been faster. The wolf was already in the house, lying in Grandma's bed. Knock, knock. "Who's there?" "Little Jesus, who some bad men wanted to kill, and who brings you from Egypt, on behalf of the 3 marshals of Carabas, a cake and a pot of butter." The thread and the bobbin. Simonette didn't finish. As often happens with children whose thoughts are working too hard, Simonette had gradually fallen asleep while listening to her own story. She resumed, however, her eyes already closed, but continuing to speak in a half-dream. "Pull the bobbin, and the thread will unravel." Now it was just fragments of sentences interrupted by long silences. "Put the cake on the chest and come sleep with me." Little Jesus undressed. "Grandma, what big eyes you have." "To see better, my child." "Grandma, what big teeth you have." "To eat you." And then, the wolf leaped on little Jesus. "And then," continued Simonette bravely, "the wolf leapt on little Jesus and ate him." "What a silly girl!" exclaimed the priest, who had just lost his bet. "She's mixing up the story of the Savior with that of Little Red Riding Hood." Then she fell asleep, her fists clenched, as the cat silently bounded back to its resting place in the ashes. And I said to the good priest, "Children sometimes see things clearly and prophesy in their own way. Are you sure, after all, that the wolf didn't eat Jesus? Jesus brought peace to the earth, and more than ever we are at war. Jesus wanted to eliminate misery, but it still reigns. Simonette is right, Mr. Priest, and the wolf did eat little Jesus, which explains a lot. We are on the Thursday after Easter. We must not let a week pass without the old Homobon having received communion. The Easter packages of Sylvany, my uncle, the parish priest of Les Trois Tours, where I had been sent to learn some Latin, said to me that evening, 'Listen, Jacques, you will serve me Mass at first light tomorrow, and then we will go up, with God's light, help, to Madeleine.' H a ribbon around the collar, and his enormous hat, mounted like a gendarme's, except for the braiding. That old Homobon from Madeleine was a man of the old-times mode who had always inspired me with great respect when he came down to the village, on fair days or Sundays, in his all-white cassid costume, his tall boots curled at the knees, his culotte A pond closed by a button made of buis as thick as a fine nut, his French habit with a tail tied wit. The priest's speech gave me great pleasure, but for nearly 4 years now, due to the poor paths and his great age, old Hamaban no longer descended, and for 4 years, during Holy Week, my uncle would go up into the mountains to bring communion to the dean of his parishioners. Carrying communion up into the mountains on these early spring days was, for me, the best kind of bush school, a bush school without worry or remorse. Absolute prohibition against talking. The ascent was not very cheerful. There is always a little discomfort when one has God with them, locked away in a small box. But I had patience and consoled myself with the troubles of the ascent by thinking of the delights of the descent. My uncle muttered Latin words, and I, whether good or bad, mumbled the responses, looking right and left, forgetting to ring my bell when we met peasants, and lingering over all sorts of guilty distractions caused by a bush where chardonners alight, a dry stone wall where lizards run, a grassy slope where it would be nice to roll, to the village of St. Trinit where the rector, warned the night before, was waiting for us. For here was the second part of the program. Our business done in Medellin. Immediately old Hamaban confessed and received communion. Immediately the little portable ciboire, now empty, disappeared with its box into the depths of the soutane. Without a worry until evening and free as air, we slid down by familiar paths the other side of the mountain. My uncle, always a bit moody, suddenly seemed to relax and rejuvenate at the thought of revisiting an old friend from seminary, someone he had not seen in 30 years. He ran with me, laughed, sharing my childlike enthusiasm for a strangely shaped pebble, a curiously flowering plant, a vibrant butterfly, or a glittering insect. Come on, slackers. Everything's burnt. And what joy when, at midday, our stomachs gnawed by the mountain's apertive air, we spotted the St. Trinit church tower, the new church surrounded by 50 little houses with gray roofs, like a hen with her chicks, and, blocking the road with his belly, my uncle's friend, the jovial rector Bienteveau, who, as soon as he caught sight of us, shouted, "We'll have to send you off to break bread at the inn." So here we are, my uncle and I, on the way to Medellin. First raise. But nothing was burned, and now St. Trinit's image only comes to my memory through the tempting smoke of a crisp and golden roasted lamb chunk, a veal haunch and blanc-mange, a plate of morels that Mr. Bienteveau knew how to discover in the unpruned vine alleys, or some pink-fleshed trout caught early that morning in our honor. From time to time, out of breath, we would stop. My uncle, grave, absorbed in his sacerdotal duties, and I dreaming of Mr. Bienteau's morals, as minute by minute the dawn sky brightened and the sun, though still unseen in the east, drew nearer, rising over the crest that hides it, suddenly to rising over the crest that hides it, spreading itself across the valleys like a wide gold cloth, bathing the pink peak of the mountains with light. My uncle, with respect, placed the good Lord on the grass, in his box, not minding if little creatures climbed up there. That farm in Medellin was indeed perched too high, halfway to paradise, as my uncle would say. Having left with dawn, it could well be 10 o'clock when we arrived. As soon as I caught sight of the building, I started ringing my bell. A dog barked, chickens fluttered, the bull, still locked up in the barn, shook its chain, but the doors remained closed and no one came to greet us. A little puzzled, we nevertheless advanced when suddenly I exclaimed, "Uncle, uncle, there's a dead person." "What?" "A dead person. There's a death in the house. Look, the bees are making mournful sounds. Indeed, the half-dozen hives lined along the rock, hollow tree trunks covered by a flat stone, each had a black cloth draped over them. Old Hamaban was dead. My uncle said, moved. Would old Hamaban have died? A neighbor kept him. His grandson, who had just left for the 3 Towers, must have missed us by taking a shortcut. Where were St. Trinit, Mr. Bienteveau, his lunch? Upon this my uncle decided that the funeral would take place the day after tomorrow, and made the arrangements. The day promised to be funereal. Once outside the house, I questioned my uncle with my eyes. Jacques, what do you want?" he answered, perhaps guessing my thoughts. "What do you want?" "Mr. Bienteveau will do without our company today. His place is in the tabernacle. We cannot, for a profane entertainment, walk the body of the Savior through the paths all day." How sad the 3 Towers now seemed to me. Instead of going down to St. Trinit, we are going back home quietly. Indeed, old Hamaban could have waited a day or 2 longer before dying, and St. Trinit, by comparison, shone in my memories with its fields adorned with daffodils, and this path through the fields along which the sound of running water accompanied us, My uncle became pensive, and I believe that deep down he shared my regrets. Even saints have their weaknesses. We had set off again when, at the first turn, under the rock where the beehives lined up, we met a sheepherder who, seeing us pass, made the sign of the cross. My uncle stopped. Sylvanie approached timidly. I said to my uncle, "It's Sylvanie. Sylvanie of Pierre-Antoine, who received confirmation at the same time as you last year, and who always had the best place in catechism." My uncle, paternally, scolded her. Why didn't she come to Mass anymore? Having often played with her, I wasn't angry to see Sylvanie again. Why, above all, wasn't she down at the 3 Towers to celebrate Easter? Very well, Sylvanie. I'll speak to them. However, Sylvanie asked for a favor. I had every intention, Father, but the 3 Towers is a long way away, and our masters are not accommodating. Could you, Father, with Jacques, watch over my animals for a moment out of fear they might enter the orchard while I go to borrow some bread? My dog Labrie ate up all my day's provisions. Hungry. No one ever passes here, and I risk staying hungry until tonight. You're actually hungry, Sylvanie, completely hungry, said my uncle. Not even had a drop of water. I've neither eaten nor drunk anything since yesterday evening, replied the girl. Even unpicked, without paying attention, some blackberry, some ripe gooseberry along the hedges. Perfect. Then my uncle questioned Sylvia about catechism and seemed delighted to find that she remembered it perfectly. Perfect. Here. Sylvia burst into laughter. It's been a long time, Mr. Curate, she said, since the finches have pecked at the last blackberries, and you know well that raspberries don't really turn red in April. He added, It's Providence. The ways of God are mysterious. Was it by chance that Providence wanted us to have lunch with Father Bienteveau that day? The confession was brief and absolution given quickly. I started to vaguely suspect this when my uncle told me, Go stand over there a bit, Jacques. I'm going to confess Sylvia. Poor Sylvia didn't have any particularly heavy sins. There was a golden oratory nearby on the steps where Sylvanie knelt down. My uncle prayed in a low voice. Sylvanie, overcome with emotion, lowered her eyes and wept. And now, my child, since you are in a state of grace, after thanking the Lord who, by a special favor, has deigned to come to you while you did not go to him, prepare yourself to receive the divine Eucharist dignly. Innumerable birds began to sing. The host shone between his fingers in a ray of bright sunlight. A stronger scent than incense rose from the warmed herbs. I felt like crying too. But while crying, I thought, I had feasted on Good Friday. For as long as we hurry now, we will be at St. Trinit before noon, where excellent Mr. Bienteveau is waiting for us with roasted lamb, trout, and morels. And in a moment of pious recognition, I blessed the sky that, instead of depriving us of an innocent joy, had willed that my dear friend Sylvanie be thus on our path, ready to celebrate Easter in place of the old homobon, impressions of Holy Week, not certainly through ostentation or bravado. But why had I been tempted, and why did my old pagan uncle, with his habits as a poacher, find that morning, instead of cheese or hard-boiled eggs in the pocket of his game bag, a large piece of sausage from Arles.B. This sausage eaten thus in full sun, by the side of a spring, while the bottle of wine, chilled, had seemed delicious to my appetite of 12 years old. Here were no dazzling repositories with candles reflected in silver and gold, no ornate tombs adorned with flowers with a little lamb lying among the moss and green. Now, remorse had come, and daring not, I, unworthy, to mix with the crowd who, from church to church, visited the paradises, after long wandering through the streets like a soul in anguish, I entered alone into the chapel of the penitent where ghosts, in hoods, celebrated the office of darkness. Black tapestries, a gigantic cross, its wounds heightened with true blood, stretched flat on the bare tiles, and instead of the sweet voices of the choir boys and nuns heard through the gratings, the funeral notes of Dies Irae. Then a monk preached on the Passion, a monk with wicked eyes who spoke to us only of hellfire and eternal flames. At first I was afraid, and I felt like crying at the thought of being thus damned forever. When night fell, I had a beautiful dream. The monk was mistaken, and that with such an air of kindness, no matter what crimes men committed, this God could not remain forever implacable. However, this conception of an eternity of despair, this denial of all hope, revolted my childish imagination. And despite the Dies Irae, despite the monk, seeing up there on the blue curve of the vault scattered with stars a Father God in a long cloak, with his arms outstretched as if to bless, smiling in his white beard, I thought that perhaps, for centuries and centuries, The earth was dead and frozen, rolling through space its dried rivers, empty oceans and leafless forests that no sun awakened. The stars were also dead, and being unable to reward or punish, it came to pass that God grew bored. From a distance, mountains of debris, once cities, and around these ruins, encroaching on the fields reaching to the horizon, crowded cemeteries filled with white tombs, so close together that between Paris and London, on both sides of the English Channel, they looked at each other in line. A bit cramped in infinity. Yes, go to God just like the kind old man with a white beard painted on the vault of the penitent found himself, how shall I say? What do you think of a little walk around? So one day, addressing St. Peter, quite glum and idle for his part with his rusty keyring, since no one was entering paradise any more and the gates were never opened. "Look here, Peter, it's the same every day here, and life has become monotonous." Pierre answered, "A walk would do me good to stretch these old legs, but I suppose the Lord wants to laugh. Where could you go since you are everywhere?" God said, "Indeed, I am everywhere." Pierre thought, "There is hell where you are not, too." Hell, that's an idea. Not to mention that I've long wanted to see for myself how things are down there. Lord, the walk is not pleasant. And here the good Lord with St. Peter, secretly leaving paradise full of white angels, flowers, and music. They take the road to hell. Pitch-black mountains, sulphurous rocks, chasms, here and there, through cracks around which trees and bushes wrinkle and bend like a bundle of thorns at the mouth of a furnace. Tongues of fire rise. Pierre, we must make do with what we have. The arch of yellow vapors, carried away in a whirl, opened above their heads in a bright and blue light. However, strange miracle, in these accursed places where, as the proverb says, God had never passed, not even at night. On this scorched soil, made of brittle gravel and ash, behind the two travelers, a little fine grass began to grow. Out on the threshold, all of the flames died out, and when they arrived before the gaping portal, the entrance to great hell, they could barely catch a glimpse, for an instant, of the identical red funnel, with its circles of ever narrower cliffs and blazing valleys, like a huge bronze rose. It was rose. Scarcely possible for them to hear the dreadful lamentation of the damned. For as soon as God set forth, the sigh released by millions and billions of chests simultaneously, God said, "I did not anticipate the effect my presence in hell would have. Neither did I." Like a bar of metal cooling, the embers rose in an instant, changed from white red to dark red. And, regaining its natural color, the rivers of bitumen stopped. The cascades of molten metals hung suspended at the side of the rocks like a mobile stalactites, while, after the storm of shrieks and blasphemes, a long silence followed, then a deep, gent tent. St. Peter replied. God and St. Peter continued to walk. What happiness, what transports of joy! As they walked, the barren slopes were adorned with fresh flowers and beautiful trees, with springs bubbling forth from all sides where damned souls, in groups, came to quench their long thirst. But St. Peter was not content. Repentance, the greedy cast aside their avarice, murderers hid their blood-stained weapons under bushes of roses, victims of love, wounded doves no longer flew in despair, knowing true love, and Satan, fierce on his throne, marveled as pride and old. Hatred melted within him at the approach of heartwarming. Tito was all goodness. The rough fisherman from Galilee, guardian of the keys and doctrine, found this respite irregular and this mitigation of torment condemnable. God, who knows all, guessed it. Peter, what are you thinking? I am thinking that God is unjust, and that we must both leave here without delay, so that once more in place of the fresh springs, tarred flames erupt, so that once more fire crackles under the kettles, and once more, forever, expiation begins. You are right, Pierre, but it is too late. Now these souls have seen God. These souls have repented. Pierre insisted, and at that moment I realized he resembled, but trait for trait, the wicked little monk preacher of passion. And, smiling in his long beard, the Eternal Father added, Chastise me, Pierre, chastise me. I admit that in coming down here, I have committed an irreparable imprudence. We will make a terrible scandal. What will the doctors of the law, the fathers of the church, say when they learn what happened? You will explain yourself with them. You will go back as soon as possible and bring them all together at a great council, the old ones and the new, those from the catacombs and those from papal Rome, burbles and purple robes, wooden hoods and golden crosses. I, in conscience, cannot leave here until eternal punishments have been abolished. On that, I awoke. Then, having sat down and blessed them with his arms extended in his blue cloak, the innumerable crowd who were shedding tears, he said further, "Whoever has seen God and repented cannot help but be forgiven. Nothing availed, a complete believer for everything else, until the hour when one no longer believes much, but alas." An old priest, a family friend to whom I recounted this, turned red with anger and predicted after my death, at the bottom of an abyss where God would not descend, the leaden cap of heretics. Heretic on that single point, I always had a vague idea that there are no eternal flames, and that one day, whether St. Peter likes it or not, God would forgive, if he pleases, just as in my dream. Melancholy, moreover, without sadness and tinged with bright hope. False story. Nothing is more beautiful than a fine autumn, the very season preferred by painters and poets who love it, some for the purple hues with which October decorates the front of the woods, others because of the delicate melancholy feeling evoked by this last smile of the year. But this depends a bit on mood and time. For, at the thought of the cold winter death, is mixed, consoling, the idea of a resurrection to come, as if behind December advancing under branches laden with frost, among withered herbs, one already sensed on the distant horizon anxious April, crowned with new flowers. Other times that harsh wind blowing, these dried leaves falling, innumerable and vain like our days, tell the heart severely of the fragility of all things. The Day of the Dead. One wanted to write something light-hearted, and suddenly a barking dog, a ringing bell, the sound of gusts sweeping across the plain, brought back sad thoughts, and reminded one that in a week it would be the Day of the Dead. Do you want to hear, on this occasion, one of those incredible yet true stories that, despite science and its stubborn denials, seem to prove that there is another world beyond the visible world, and evoke the mysterious emotion even among the most skeptical? Besides, don't expect me to give an opinion. I don't explain, I tell tales. A few years ago, the small town of Poisbrunn had an old church classified as a historic monument, and a bell-ringer, Jean-Joseph Moudet, who also performed the duties of sacristan, died. Really lowered, and always dim. The church, once a cathedral, but stripped of its chapter and bishop since the Revolution, was dark and empty, devoid of wood paneling and paintings, and seemed immense with its 3 naves, each defined by 2 rows of heavy Roman pillars, its domes by 2 rows of heavy Roman pillars, its dome barely letting in a glimpse of daylight through the bull's-eye window, and its side chapels, which the floor, having risen over the centuries, required descending a flight of 20 steps through an interior porch to enter this half-subterranean church, and even brave people felt a shiver upon entering. The bell-ringer was a former soldier, not superstitious, and only mediocre in his devotion, as often happens with those who live too closely to religious matters without being priests. In the vault of one of the side aisles, drags all the way to the tiles. But for first-class glass, where the large bell rings, Jean-Joseph Moutet had to climb into the belfry. The old church, still cold and always besieged by the wind, still exists, and seems to want to last until the hour of judgment, given how well it was built. But the bell-ringer no longer exists, having died last year due to the following circumstances. For regular bells, Jean-Joseph Mout only had to pull the long rope that, passing through a hole. Now, it must be known that on All Saints' Day morning, at 5 o'clock, that is, while it is still night, it is customary to ring the first-class glass. Jean-Joseph Moutet, although an old soldier, did not much like to cross the church like this at 5 in the morning, all alone, with his lantern. Jean-Joseph Moutet said, "It's the rats!" He would do it nonetheless, although it was a chore, entering through the sacristy door, which he had a key for, cutting across the large nave, and ascending the narrow bell-tower staircase that opens into the wall beside the baptismal chapel. For a long time, but only on the morning of All Saints' Day, as he passed by the baptismal chapel, Jean-Joseph Mout thought he heard, deep within that chapel, a faint rustling noise like someone turning pages in a book in the shadows. He also said, "It's the wind blowing through a broken stained glass window corner." No. But he never looked, preferring to remain in doubt, afraid without knowing why of what he might discover. Yet 1 year, curiosity got the better of him. His wife was ill, and that worried him. Previous day and secured it with its large clasp. A strange thing that sent shivers down his spine. Before his eyes a sheet turned over, 2 sheets as if an invisible hand had flipped them, and at the top of one of the pages he was able to read his wife's birth certificate. Jean-Joseph Moutet said nothing about this to anyone, but sadly he thought, "My poor wife is dead." As the papers rustled, he gently pushed the grill that separated the chapel from the choir, directing the light of his lantern towards the source of the noise, and he saw, wide open on the marble cover of the font, black and strewn with the tears of a tears, candles, the great register of baptisms that he knew should be closed, since he had dusted it. And indeed, within 15 days, his wife died. From that moment on, Jean-Joseph Moot dared not climb the bell tower alone again. However, one time when they had drunk a little more white wine than usual, Jean-Joseph Moot could no longer contain himself and told his friends about what happened every year at the baptismal chapel. The friends were incredulous. Jean-Joseph suggested they go down. Under the pretext that he lacked the strength to ring the large bell, he would go out accompanied by 2 or 3 friends, and up there, in the air, amidst the joy of the rising day, they would hold small festivities where, between peals, to catch their breath and be entertained, they would drink white wine and eat chestnuts. They descended, and indeed, upon reaching the chapel, distinctly one of the 2 witnesses told me they heard the sound of paper being stirred. Jean-Joseph Moot said, "Silence." Suddenly, Jean-Joseph Moot let out a deep sigh. Death is settling accounts. Then, when all noise had ceased, he pushed open the gate and entered first with his lantern. His lantern fell and went out. "Moot, what's wrong? Answer us." But Mout did not respond. They found matches, relit the lantern, and saw the register open on the basin. Moot unconscious, his name written at the top of the page. Jean-Joseph Moot was not dead, but he was hardly alive, for since then, they told me, he had only lain there, motionless. Jean-Joseph Moot did not get to enjoy the new figs, and it fell to another bell-ringer to climb up to the belfry the following year on All Saints' Day. The first snow to my little friend Georgette Charpentier, Luxembourg, in winter-time. It's morning, the clock marks 10 o'clock less a quarter. On the palace roof a chimney pipe smokes, and around it, sheltered from the cold, sparrows chat while watching the snow. Sparrow. What a beautiful thing snow is. Our garden looks like sugar. It's ridiculous, truly. Look over there at the body of water. Its gray stone border sparkles entirely white this morning. That's what must delight the swan. Another chickadee. The discus-thrower gravely holds a large white ball on his fist. French queens wear cotton hats, and thanks to the flakes that the wind sticks to their bark, trees white on one side, black on the other assemble masquerade pages. First chickadee. A real etching. There are, however, birds that do not want to acknowledge the penetrating poetry of a winter landscape. Swallows, for example, hirondelles, ducks. Second chickadee. Disdainfully. Those people are not artists. First chickadee. Is there anything more joyful in the world than a vast pristine snowfield? Second chickadee. One can make 1,000 little drawings with their feet while walking on it. First chickadee. A little while ago, behind the orangery, a guard showed the tip of his tricorn, but he quickly returned home, seeing the color of the weather. No guards, the garden is ours. The mob of the chicks. The lovely thing about snow. Second chick. First chick. Does it ever fall outside of Paris? They say so. But silence. Here comes someone. It's a young person. The chicks, in a whisper. First chick. Some poor, late worker. Second chick. Those beautiful boots. There she goes trotting on the balls of her feet, through the snow, where each of her steps makes a tiny black hole. The chicks, in unison. How shiny! First chick. Beneath the red petticoat that she pulls up with both hands, the full skirt trails bravely on the snow like a real tail of a friar. This woman looks like a bird. She reminds me of my Pierrette, a chick from St. Sulpice Towers. The sparrows, bursting with laughter. The beautiful thing about snow. The young person disappears. One hears plaintive chirps in the air. Everyone raises their heads. A rustic sparrow arrives, ruffled, blinded, and frozen. The sparrows. The rustic sparrow, landing on the roof. Good evening, gentlemen. What a sight, good Lord. This must be someone from the province. I'm cold. The rustic sparrow, timidly. I come from Verrières-le-Pont. First sparrow. Come closer, my friend, we'll make room for you. The rustic sparrow hesitates. But do come, by Jove. Chimneys weren't invented for sparrows. There you go. Sit down comfortably like us, beak outside, tail in the chimney. The rustic sparrow. Oh, it's warm here. He shakes his wings with pleasure. Oh, my friends, my good friends. What a desolation in the countryside. A foot of snow everywhere. From a distance, here and there, A few grass blades show through, but you can't dine on grass blades. The hedges disappear under the snow. The bushes look like white wheels. No more blackberries, no more berries, no more prunes, nothing. Birds, like flies. The sparrows, softened. Poor people. The rural sparrow. By the way, do you have lunch here? Since yesterday, I haven't put anything in your beak. Just a chenavat seed that I picked up near a spring. It must be said that the snow always melts a little near springs. The sparrows. We have lunch. And will you invite me? The rural sparrow. The sparrows. We invite you. The rural sparrow. It's the bad weather that drove me to your place. On my way, I took shelter for a moment under the porch of a pigeon loft. Here, what a temptation to go in and steal the pigeon's grain. I was hungry, but I resisted. The tower sparrow, St. Sulpice. You did well, my child. The Campanile sparrow, isn't it? Sometimes you understand when you're in it. Whoosh! The window closes, and there you are caught. I lost an uncle like that. Men made him fry. But that doesn't matter. I would still like to eat a piece. First, sparrow. A little patience. Second, sparrow. We will sit down to table in a moment. The sparrows, in unison. In a moment. In a moment. First, sparrow. Me. It's not like in the country here. Snow doesn't scare us. The sparrows, even if it falls, even if it hides the berries on the bushes and the small seeds we find in the grass, we don't have a harder time for it. There is an old gentleman who loves us. Every morning he goes to buy soft breads there, near the theater at the corner shop, then he crumbles them for us. It's exquisite. We peck each other. We catch the crumbs in mid-air. It's exquisite. Camp country sparrow, delighted. Your gentleman seems like a brave man. Sparrows, in unison. A very brave man. Tower sparrow from St. Sulpice Church. And he's also a virtuous man. He doesn't smoke, and his bread doesn't have that horrible pipe taste. Sparrows, in unison. He's a virtuous man. A very virtuous man. Camp country sparrow, Dottie. Will the gentleman come at least? First, sparrow. He wouldn't miss it for an empire. Look at the end of the garden. This large black fence adorned with golden spearheads. Behind the fence is the street, and beyond that a house with beautiful copper doors. That house is a cafe. Our old gentleman goes there to read the newspapers every morning, and just now, when 10 o'clock rings, you'll see him appear at the door. Sparrows. Q. Kui, kui, kui. What will he bring us today? Soft bread or rye? A moment of silence. Dong, dong. The clock, muffled by snow. Dong, dokshi. Dong, dong, dokshu. Dong, 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 dokti. Dong, dong, dokshi. Dong, doch. Laisse-moi know. Battant des et la tortille. Dixiers. Voilà. Kui, kui, kui. Voilà. Le vieil homme fait un pas dans la rue, puis il se regarde le temps s'étendre. Un vieux monsieur aux cheveux gris, vêtu d'une redingote râpée, apparaît à la porte du café. Les moineaux le saluent bruyamment. Tiens, le moineau de campagne. Il ne vient pas. Premier moineau Qu'aimez racontiez-vous donc? Il ne vient pas. C'est incompréhensible. Les moineaux, cruellement déçus. Je m'en souviens maintenant. Deuxième moineau. Time. C'est incomprehensible. Le moineau de campagne. Le pauvre homme ne peut pas venir. Il lui faudrait marcher dans la neige. Hier soir, en piquant une étain de pain à côté de son soulier, j'ai remarqué que la semelle était décousue. Putain. Et notre déjeuner. Premier moineau. Slimes. Nous ne déjeunerons pas aujourd'hui. The sparrows, sorrowfully. Qui, 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 qui. The sparrow of St. Sulpice Tower. Ah, the campfire sparrow. Let us learn to submit to the decrees of Providence. But no, priest, I have a good appetite myself. When we arrive, the road will be cleared. Many horses pass through there. Listen. The strong wind has abated a bit. The snow is falling only slightly. I am inclined to go take a turn by the fortifications, at the Italian barrier. Horses are good to frequent. One can pick and glean from what they leave behind. The sparrows. From what they leave behind? The sparrow. Ugh, horrible. Ma'am! It will be like in the country. Winter pleasures. He flies away. After hesitating for a moment, the other sparrows follow him. Madam, You ask me what I am doing, in the midst of December, in this hermit corner of the mountain. They only have politics on their minds, waiting for me like a prey, and when I pass out of sight, they follow with a long glance that I sense is laden with reproaches. I mostly take long detours, through wasteland and dead vines, to escape the anxious interrogations of my brave peasant brothers, who, troubled by the revelations of the investigation, already doubt the representatives they have elected and want to know once and for all about the issue of Tonkin. Then the man returns to his work, turning the rocky soil with a plow or struggling with an axe against a stout oak, deformed and all in trunk from being annually cut back, while I take the rural path. And, shod to fear neither pebbles nor ruts, I enjoy with simple hedonism the delicate sensations of returning old and reflecting on my days in the places where, as a young man, I once dreamt about life. This country is more pleasant than you could ever imagine. There is a doubling of self, a confused reverse of memories that cast the soul into a state of exquisite turmoil, comparable to the intoxicating obsession left behind by a beautiful dream. Here, true midday ends, not vaguely, in sickly shadows, with floating and indeterminate borders, but in all its vigor and strength, at the foot of bare rocks that stand like a rampart. Beyond, it is the Gapensay Dauphinois, a land of walnuts and forage, a green alpine cirque already, enclosed by long snowy peaks. And indeed, I feel for you, Parisians, who do not know our winter. At your place winter is a clear thing, cold and never clear skies. Where we are, it is Provence, white in the springtime with almond flower blossoms, and still retaining some gaiety despite winter. For, as far as the eye can see, everywhere on these sheltered coasts, olive groves cling, silvered by the warm breeze. At the dark rear of a hewback, snow has fallen, leafless bushes. Here, on the other hand, it is a season voluptuously nuanced, made of shivers and smiles, like the North's autumns of a poetic melancholy that the South does not know. Such are my post-lunch joys. In the morning, I hunt. A few steps more. At the first bend, the sun becomes hot enough to make you take off your jacket. Springs sing, thawed, responding to the cry of prematurely in love chicks. Grass brightens with new sprouts, and a rose bush, overburdened with roses, straightens up in array on the white wall of the shed, next to withered vines. Do not cry out. I hunt in spite of my instinctive horror of slaughter and bloodshed, nor the wild boar. The best thing is to admit it straight away. Not the bear, be at ease. The last bear in the region was killed 80 years ago while it was eating wild pears by a little old shepherd I once knew. As for the hare and the red partridge, hunting them in these rugged areas requires a vigor of legs that Paris has weakened too much. Well, I hunt small birds. Yes, those little birds, those kind singers. Last winter with the doctor, did he tell you about it? These small birds I kill. Or rather, I'm supposed to kill. In a circumstance that mitigates nothing, I kill them cowardly at the post. You don't know hunting at the post? We ate, with heavy hearts, so many tempting skewers, cursing the fierce Roman nature, the horrible Caesarean atavism that drives good Provençaux to turn even the tiniest aerial inhabitants into food. Around Marseille and Carpentras, especially around Carpentras, hunting at the post is elevated to the level of a national institution. I don't know. How did he induce me? It's Aimé César, Guindon César, a Cisteron native from the plains that the Vaucluse irrigates, who first introduced this delightful yet loathsome pastime into our mountains. Seduced by his infernal eloquence, one day I agreed to follow him, almost against my will, with a feeling of rebellious curiosity. The preparations are charming. Now I am caught. I have felt the blood, and like St. Augustine at the circus games, I return to the hunt for my pleasure. We set off with the dawn, around 7 o'clock. It is in the first rays that the hunt is good. With the body well covered, the face whipped by a gentle chill, we walk cheerfully along the dry and resonant road. The hunting post. Up above, halfway up the mountain, streaks of mist, white as silver under the sun that already reaches them, promise a beautiful day. On either side of the cabin, 2 dead trees that serve as sentinels. A picturesque and simple installation. A wooden hut in the middle of the fields, sheltered from human eyes, and hidden by a few oak branches whose golden-aged foliage shimmers in the wind with a dry and metallic sound. Sing. Inside, suspended from nails and arranged in a cornice manner, a series of narrow cages where the apple live. The cabin has slits like a fortress. The first task is to arrange the cages on the frozen grass at the base of the ledges. Our collection of tamed young birds is complete, and friend Caesar boasts of his more than a great lord of his pack. Some are real tenors. They cost him 20 and 30 francs each. Here's the solitary finch, the dancing finch with a yellow beak and finely tinted plumage, the passerine. Small passerine bird, a delicate morsel that the uninformed would take for a large sparrow. The linnet, all gray. The verdure, dressed in green with yellow striping. The ortolan, a golden bird in its resplendent costume, seems to detect the intimate succulences. Chie, the bushy chai, magnificent with its long tail. The mustached chai, whose black stripe, descending from the eye to the neck, gives it a warrior's visage. And finally, the grasset, the incomparable grasset. Not a chardonneret, for example. Friend Caesar has a sensitive heart. He makes grace to chardonnerets. Is it a song or a complaint? Perhaps both. As soon as they feel free in the air, as soon as they catch a glimpse of a piece of sky through the wicker bars of their prison, the poor captives chirp. But time is ticking. Let's lock up. Then, peacefully seated in his cabin, with the barrel of his gun resting against the embrasure, my hunter takes his time and machine guns them. But their brothers in the woods, their brothers in the valleys, hear them, and, drawn by a mysterious sympathy, they come, chirping, chattering, responding to perch beside them, as close as possible, on the branches. A few drops fell yesterday, and the birds, eager to leave the damp foliage, will descend to the plain. Silence! I watch my branch. Caesar watches his. The wind blows, the calls echo, the river roars in the distance. In the narrow opening through which I look, a grand landscape frames itself. Trees, white houses, rocks, and it would be delightful without the necessity of putting to death the unfortunate little finch that comes. Hold on! There it sits, right in front, at the top of the dead branch, and looks like a leaf singing, black against the blue sky. They kill the tits and jays by the dozen. Sometimes, as they fall, the small corpse gets impaled on a sharp grass stem. As for me, to tell the truth, madam, I have never killed one. And indeed, for several days now, I have prevented my friend Caesar from killing any. The perfect hunter, Caesar has this unfortunate habit of murmuring, not another one today, every time a chick comes to perch on his branch. When I hear that, suddenly, through the embrasure allotted to me, I fire. The noise of my futile shot scares the targeted room, and I have the pleasure of hunting without exposing myself to any remorses. Caesar told me the other day, I don't kill anything anymore, scoundrel that I am. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but you always shoot at the precise moment I have my finger on the trigger, and it makes my prey run away. Of course, Caesar is suspicious. He no longer waits for me at the start. He greets me without enthusiasm, and I fear that one of these mornings, despite our old friendship, he might forbid me entry to the sacred post. Anyway, my conscience is clear. In this way, for a week now, I have saved the future of at least 200 nests. As you know, madam, statesmen employ their mornings more wrongly. I saw winter mail last night, while the gust blew and the rain beat against the roofs. I had a dream, but a fantastically mythological dream, as if painted by Hammond the artist. Coldness coming. She wore a crown made of glowing foliage, laden with green nuts, and slowly she advanced on a snail. It was a pale little girl, dressed in a long, snowy coat, where shimmered and clattered as fringes these fine crystal needles that the breeze suspends to the moss of the fountains, with 1,000 embroidery recalls the silver arabesques that frost dulls our windows. For there is no denying it, for several days already, a little girlfa same I saw in my dream stops every morning under my window, shouting, "Scales! New scales!" Forgive me for such lyricism. And already, at the cabaret's grills, the first stuffed snails, precursors of winter, have left their fragrant soul's incense smoking towards the sky. I had the fortune to be born in Provence, yet, more than the Parisian himself, the Provençal is fond of snails, and this has been the case since time immemorial. On this very subject, while reading Sallust, I made an important discovery that seems to have escaped the notice of historians thus far. Marius laid siege to it, knowing that the king's treasures were locked within. Here in brief is what Caius Sallustius Crispus tells us. Not far from the Molucca River, in the area where the current border between Morocco and Algeria is located, stood a rock in the plain with a fortress on its summit. I first discovered that the snail, barely suspected of such ancient illustration, played a role in the African wars when the Romans under Marius fought there, and moreover, the particular esteem our Provence peasants hold for this succulent gastropod dates back approximately 2,000 years. But the rock was sheer. The fort had a considerable garrison, ample supplies of grain, and a living spring. So after much time and many pains, Marius despaired until chance came to his aid. He picked up one, then two, then four, and, fully absorbed in his collection, gradually made his way to the top of the escarpment. Chance willed that a Ligurian, a simple soldier in the auxiliary cohorts, leaving the camp to fetch water, spotted snails crawling among the rocks on the rampart of the fortress. One must continue reading in the old historian, how the good soldier, a snail enthusiast, having thus observed the weak point of the defenses, went to find Marius, how Marius entrusted him with the leadership of a small troop, armed with horns, trumpets, and how the enemy was defeated, believing itself to be surrounded. And this explains why, even today, from Marseille to Vintimille, gourmets only swear by snails. For among us, without any mockery, snails are considered game. In the adventure, one fact only matters, that the hero is a Ligurian, that is to say, a mountain dweller from Low Provence, keeping in the midst of camps in distant lands, as our conscripts would do, the memory of their native land, and the faith in it. The snails seasoned with aioli were prepared in green sauce, and the people spread out among the vines. When a fresh shower falls from heaven and washes the dust from the leaves, a cry immediately rings out, "The snail has shown its horns!" The snail brings joy to Bastidons, cabinons, little villas, roasted paradises under the sun, without which the man from there cannot live. Not that big yellow snail that Burgundy sends to Paris, but a snail from the south, a small gray-brown snail, leaner, finer, in harmony with the land of the inhabitant. No! On the soaked earth, along the dripping trunks, women, children, old men, and half-men gather snails by the basketful. Indeed, the hunt is good, and in 8 days, on the first Sunday, every kitchen will be celebrating. In 8 days at most, before they can be eaten, snails must fast. They are held captive in flower vases, with a board and stone above them. But snails are strong, moreover, devilishly clever. In dry years, there is a shortage of snails. To escape from their dark prison, they help each other out, make a ladder, unite every effort into one formidable push, so that it is not uncommon to find the flower vase empty one morning, the walls of the room covered with silvery slime, and snails perched around the ceiling. In winter, it's better. They are picked just right, curled behind a thin membrane, and ready to sing at the bottom of the pot without even needing to fast. Nevertheless, one can still find them. Among the tufts of large fennel, whose tender green they love and whose strong smell attracts them, or else still piles of green shoots that prudent people leave deliberately in the gap between vine rows to keep some moisture in the soil. To find as many as you want, all you have to do is tear down the neighbor's dry stone wall. No vain scruples. The neighbor will surely repay you in kind come season, and both of you will ride off these landslides as the result of freezing and thawing. The idea of eating snails in winter remains poetically linked to one of my most tender memories, to one of my most profound child impressions. Around 2 o'clock, hunger hit us. Cheered up by a fine sunny day, crisp air and crackling snow, a friend and I had deserted school, determined not to return until evening. Lunch was long past, and we had only found an apple frozen in ice on the edge of a frozen stream to satisfy our hunger. He did not want to give up yet, but my friend, a bold boy with instincts like a redskin, was not afraid for so little. Anxiously, with a heavy heart at hearing the cheerful chirping of young birds seeking their way in the trees, I already thought of retiring. He was thinking, hoping. Forward, suddenly, showing me smoke on the horizon. I think old Mark is burning his hedge. Indeed, old Mark had set fire to a pile of brambles crowning the small wall supporting his field, and was fanning the flames with a fork. No. This is the process our farmers use to keep hedges at a good height. When nothing was left, old Mark left, and my friend said, "Now, let's eat snails." Which snails? I didn't see any snails. But my friend was right. We found well over 2 dozen in the middle of the coals, roasted in their shells. The ashes slightly salted them. They exhaled a deliciously appetizing smell. While eating, we warmed up and dreamed of Robinson. A happy day. Everything was laughing and everything was greening. The true spring. Not this gloomy April with ice hat and hail, which, like a princess in her tower, plays the whimsical jailer, keeping flowers imprisoned. In the woods, bands of birds vividly beaked at the new shoot. The meadows were full of narcissi, and, yellowed with gold dust, the drunken bees danced, while on the fields where, marking the pattern of the furrows, the young wheat already pointed, black and flowering almond trees swayed in the wind, perfumed with their branches snow. And people who, since sunrise, without worry about work, had not left the step in front of their doors, kept saying, over and over again, contemplating the sky, "What a beautiful day!" It was so beautiful, so cruelly beautiful, that Furman and I, on our way to class, suddenly fell into despair. Not just despair, physical fatigue. Our feet were leaden, our legs no longer carried us. The college seemed very far away. It didn't seem possible to reach it. Even if we did reach it, it seemed we would never see the end of the endless study hours. In the grand place, scoundrels played in rags. Their fate seemed better than ours. In front of a door with a porch to enjoy the warmth, they had rolled a paralytic man in his chair. We thought of eternal punishments. We felt the sensation of Father Bourdain's hell, whose vicar sometimes terrified us with his dial without hands and his inexorable pendulum that with each swing answers, "Never! Always!" to the agonizing boredom of the damned. Under an old Indian-drawn bedroom robe, his body stiffened, angular, immobile. His lips drooped. A pale face like ivory, fixed eyes, vitrified. The man was pitiful to look at, but college did not wait for him. He had a scarf tied around his knees, and from time to time his right hand, only half dead, tried the gesture of chasing away flies. Eventually, we made it to college. The door was slightly ajar, and in the courtyard that had once been a cloister, the professors strolled. "Push," Furman told me. "No, you push." Neither of us did. The ramparts. The first bell rang out. We still had at least 5 minutes left, and we had time to take a walk up to the ramparts. A place fit for gods in winter and on days of mistral, the true fireplace of King Rene, where all the city's slackers gathered to burn a sapling for free, in the sun, while smoking pipes. The river murmured in the distance. We heard the gentle cooing of countless pigeons fleeing from their nests in the breaches. But they seemed so much more pleasant that afternoon, deserted, in solitude, with the honey-colored violets perfuming their ancient stones, and the large white-flowered wolf-gapes standing tall against the blue sky, between the crenellations. One felt in a place of asylum. Dong. Quietly, behind us, over the roofs of the houses, the clock chimed. Dong. 2. "Oh, clock!" exclaims Furman. Then, "We arrived at 1 minute past 1. It's only a moment. You must have miscalculated. It can't be 2 o'clock. Let's wait for the reply." What to do? But when the reply came, the clock, in the same voice, struck 2 o'clock seriously. Time had passed too quickly, unbeknownst to us. The die was cast, class was missed. To say that we were sorry would be a lie. On the contrary, once the decision was made, one felt their foot lighter and mind freer. Masters of ourselves until nightfall. Now the college seemed far away. Furman concluded, "Here it is. We should hide our books." And to start, we hid our books in the crook of a sapling on the crumbling slope of the old ditch, amidst the brambles. A resourceful boy, this Furman. The true child of nature, not bound by rules, but unparalleled in the art of discovering nests or stealing rogue fruits. The day was no less delightful. Unfortunately, due to the season, we could not hope for cherries or figs, and the birds were still wary and cautious, a tuft of wool in their beaks. Furman, to avoid bad encounters, immediately led me far from too populated areas where the bourgeois have their villas, and artisans their bottle-emptying Plaistow remote locations, through forgotten paths behind hills that hid the city. In contrast, here and there, on the peaks, along the rivers, white patches appeared, which were unknown villages to me. So much knowledge terrified me. I felt like I was at the end of the world. Furman named them. This is Bivans, and over there, further away, it's Salignac. We experienced all the joys. Climbing the rocks in the grass that smelled good. We took a rest under a cave. We tasted from the grass near a spring. And since Furman had some tobacco in the bottom of his pockets, we filled a shepherd's pipe, and in exchange, he gave us milk. Furman himself seemed less brave. But as the sun set, we felt remorse slowly fill our souls. He was the first to speak of returning. A sad return, with dragging steps. Suddenly, I shuddered. We walked side by side, heads down, saying nothing. But the same fears held us, and our thoughts were shared. In front of a small cottage, on the outskirts of town, someone called my name. "Let's hide," Furman said. "It might be your father." It wasn't my father, but one of his neighbors, the estimable Mr. Pallock, a land surveyor and merchant. I recognized him by his voice, his redingote, the stake driven into the ground near him, and a strange-looking instrument he was waving. "Come closer, we need you." He called me, and also Furman. What on earth could he want from us? Amy blushed. His presence did not surprise me. We approached timidly, I more so than Furman, for I had just seen, picking flowers a few steps from the estimable Mr. Pallock, beautiful Miss Olympe, his daughter, an imposing figure that I perhaps loved as one does at 12 years old, without realizing it, and whose black, scornful gaze between her always half-closed eyelids, for some reason, mad. The estimable Mr. Pallock often brought beautiful Miss Olympe with him on his surveying operations. It was a matter of setting a boundary between two parts of an inheritance, and we, Furman and I, were to serve as witnesses. A sudden joy swelled my heart, mixed with love. 2 peasants had come, each bringing a brick, and in front of them, beside a hole next to which lay a large stone, the estimable Mr. Pallock explained what was expected of us. First, the truant schoolboy vanished. My father could say nothing. However, the 2 peasants had broken their brick into 2 pieces. One is allowed to miss college once by chance to render service to society and to act as a witness for the esteemed Mr. Pallock. Then I was proud to be doing a manly deed, and happy that beautiful Miss Olympe saw me. They exchanged one, keeping each one, threw the other 2 into the hole, and planted the large stone on top. I followed with interest this strange ceremony. "Have you seen?" asked the esteemed Mr. Pallock. "We have seen," he continued. "Then you will remember." At that moment 2 formidable slaps, 2 slaps that could knock us over, fell on Furman's and my cheeks. A sad end to a happy day. Furman screamed, and indeed, never in my life had beautiful Miss Olympuso, to spare, she laughed, ever seen me so red. They assured me that there was no shame in it, and that it was an ancient custom, excellent for engraving certain important facts in memory. I bore a grudge that still lasts, against the esteemed Mr. Pallock, and for a long time, even though still in love with beautiful Miss Olympe, I took great detours in my walks to avoid the stone, the accursed stone that had seen me, in her presence, so severely humiliated. The little pages of music to my dear friends Eugenie and Marie Duhamel, little pages of music, for pages of music truly existed. Isn't it true, my dear friends, that just the name makes you dream, and that, without really knowing what the job entails, you would want to be pages of music? At that time, every ambulant musician had his own. Marie de Medici took several from Italy, the fashion following her, and until Louis XIV it continued. The illustrious Assisi, emperor of the burlesque, whose extravagant adventures you will read when you are older, always traveled with 2 small pages whom he had them sing to instruct them. And the Chevalier brought Lully, as he would have brought an American parrot. Lully made his fortune at court. Lully, this demon of 13 years, evil and quick, and black although son of a miller, was no different than a music page when the Chevalier de Guise met him playing the violin through the streets of Florence. "Bring me a small Italian if you find one pretty," had said Mademoiselle de Montpensier to the Chevalier de Guise. You see that the music pages of today, the poorly groomed pifferari, who scratch the miserere of the trouvère on their knee and shout, "Evviva l'Italia!" in the capital's cafes, have glorious ancestors. Good days were certainly not lacking. It must have been a strange and charming life for a boy aged 12 to 15, to go about the country like this, studying music, not war, and carrying not the lance or shield of a knight, but, perhaps better, the theorbo or lute and the tablature. Book of some poet-singer. It is Madame Royale who invites them, wanting to hear their new song, master and pupil, to her palace at Lavigne. It is a prior, it is a legate who regale them with episcopal wine, papal wine. One competes for their company. In front of them, along the whole road, castles open their gates. To the master, florins by handfuls. To the student, to the timid child standing there, a coat covered with gold trimmings, a feathered cap, and a dagger given as a gift. There were also days of hardship. The apprentice musician took his share of everything, sometimes at the expense of music. Witness this Perotin, page to D'Assoucy, who lost his voice from too much drinking. Then come stays in good towns. Fellow musicians met, joyful companions who celebrate you, adventures on the great road and in taverns, duels for a tune or a verse. Doors would no longer open, ears remained insensitive. One crossed hard seasons, singing in cabarets for the lower classes, with sad feathers and old-fashioned points. The art of music brought him success, for the master, with empty pockets, returned home at a better hour, and the page's lesson seemed longer as a result. But the worst of all was when the master disappeared, imprisoned for some wicked affair. Or when he died, leaving his page alone in a foreign land. I once read in an estate in the Haut-Dauphiné, half farm, half castle, a letter from a small musician abandoned there during an entire season of snow. Unfortunately, the letter never reached its destination, and is still preserved after over 200 years in the archives among other paperwork. Dear sister, it's so cold here and your little Giovanni is unhappy. You remember last spring when Signor Antonio, my good master, despite my age, considered me strong enough in music and for singing. He started talking about Paris. Paris is far, he said, but one could sing on the way. In Paris, the Queen is a Medici. With a lute and a few fine airs, in Paris, one is sure of fortune. Paris, always Paris. And always the Queen, the court. So one fine morning, we set off. Poor Pulcinella. With our musical instruments and books, we carried, on an ass, that great puppet from Naples, all dressed in white and belted with leather, which Antonio himself had carved from wood, and which made us laugh so much last year. He has not had any luck, nor have I for that matter, and old Antonio even less. Everything went well for the first few months, once we left Italy. It was Provence. It was a pleasure to travel. Imagine a country resembling our own. The sea, a beautiful sun, arbors on white houses and villages and big cities. Then, almost Italian speech, brave people always ready to sing, always ready to laugh. Our duo, instruments and voices, was wonderful, and Pulcinella, though all his tricks were not equally understood, had successes without parallel. Yet we had to leave. Beautiful France, that France. The master, all joyful, repeated, "Paris, Paris." What a path, little sister. So we plunged into the mountains, heading towards Lyon or shortest route. Rocks, always rocks. Farther and farther a poor village, and the sky growing less blue, and as we climbed, our speech becoming barbaric. My songs weren't appreciated. As for Pulcinella, he was no longer understood. We were dark, Antonio and I. Even Pulcinella himself fell into melancholy. Pulcinella lacked enthusiasm and vivacity. His red eye dimmed. His cock's face looked sad. "It's freezing, poor one." "It freezes for lack of sun," Antonio said, trying to smile. Then he repeated, "Paris, Paris," to give us a little hope. No more recipe on the streets nor in the inns, and with the cold coming. The cold, the hunger, what misery. We had sold the donkey. I carried the books and lutes. Things are going bad. Antonio went ahead, through the wet fields, through the roads full of ruts. Things are going bad. Paris is too far, he murmured. One day it snowed, and then it snowed every day. Moreover, we could no longer advance much because the old master was getting tired. We stopped in a village. They told us that the roads were blocked for a month and that we had to wait for the return of good weather, to wait without money. This discouraged old Antonio. Alas, he sighed. Alas, his last. Hear you, Sorellina. Poor Pulcinella. In the evening, near a fir-tree fire where the peasants had made room for us, Antonio, with the clear flame, wanted to give me his last lesson. But I didn't know that it was his last. Then he kissed me harder than usual, and we went up to the attic to sleep in the hay. In the middle of the night, a noise woke me up. I looked. I had hung the Pulcinella in front of the window. I had securely attached it to a large nail with a rope. Face to face with me, white as snow and illuminated by the moonlight behind, Pulcinella swayed. It's natural, isn't it, for a Pulcinella to sway? Antonio, Antonio. Yet this made me afraid. I cried. Antonio didn't answer. I turned around, and on the far wall, in the bright light from the window, I noticed a black shape. I could see the rope and the nail. Perhaps the shadow of Pulcinella. Antonio. At that moment perhaps it was the wind. The Pulcinella came loose and fell. Alas! Antonio! And on the far wall, strangely enough, I continued to see his immobile shadow, with the rope, with the nail. Antonio was buried. The shadow of Pulcinella was Antonio, my master, my poor master, who had hanged himself. The villagers burned Pulcinella, the barbarians, the bewitched pretender. Now I am alone. Good luck in Paris, dear music page. But spring is coming. I will go to Paris, play at court a beautiful song that I composed in memory of my good old master. Pulcinella nella neva, Polichinelle in the snow, Polichinelle dead from cold. May you find fortune there with your melodies, and one day, not without glory, wear the satin-embroidered habit of the king's little violins. But I think. And this letter that never left? Moret and Perdiglet. Perhaps spring comes too late for poor Giovannino. Perhaps he is dead too, dead in the snow, dead from cold like Antonio and Paula Chanel. They are certainly not wrong, those who, as soon as December appears on the horizon, wrapped in fur, take the train to Antibes, Monaco, Nice, and so many other almost African corners of our Provence. Here, in our mountainous region where the olive tree thrives, its visits are more frequent. But in these two fortunate climates it is rare for snow, after expanding and descending, sometimes aided by a gust of wind, to finally reach the plain. For this Africa is charming, where one can see the snow sparkle, where, sitting under a palm tree between an orange grove and a field of anemones, on the edge of a laughing sea splashed by 1,000 rays, one can admire the violet Alps that are 1,000 rays, crowned with a thin line of silver, drawing closer and wider each day. What a miracle! And it's always a festival when snow arrives, not just a touch of a finger, just enough, as the Japanese and Philippe Berti say, for a little dog, out for a walk, to draw daisies with its paws. What magic! During the night the whole landscape changed. A greedy spring, for example. But the sky is clear like lapis, the morning rose superb, and it's warm under the rocks, in this known shelter where the sun shines. You would say, looking at the gentle weather and the white almond trees on the hillsides, that a new spring has just begun, and that the flower breeze is blown. Because, in the unpaved fields where the morning track of the rural mailman is marked, black in the middle of a white blanket, herds of turkeys are driven, clucking, to market, scent the pleasant scent of the fruit garden. It also announces, this spring day whose flowers made of crystals are already melting into droplets, it also announces the return of good stories at twilight. Would you like one of these tales? A spring that announces Christmas. The grand meal, the log blessed, nougat with honey, brown drum major of an entire regiment of treats, and the bottles of claret throwing their corks to the ceiling in a burst of foam and pearls. Winter pears with theirs, frozen skin that we go, for midnight dessert, seek with Grandma, on the straw where sorbet ripens, amid. It's about snow, and might resemble Little Red Riding Hood a bit too much, the golden liquor rising above the water. Do you know Poix-Pagan, on the road to Saint-Denis, near the ruined chapel? The thing, my children, happened long before the time of the consuls, and it is the true story of Belle Murette and Perdigolet. I will not change it, however, and I want to tell you the story as an old woman told me one cold night at the oil mill, while the hearth blazed and filled the eyes with searing smoke, while the donkey turned its grindstone, men pushed the grating bar of the press, and women stood before the tall vats, carefully gathering, with matronly gestures. That red rock where there are eagles? Where one can see remnants of towers? Can be. And where people who go to the communal lands of Saint-Denis cut the bedding bring, at the end of February, such beautiful scarlet flowers. Flowers, my friends, that have never been seen elsewhere, flowers like kings themselves don't have. They pick them at the foot of the rock, in the little wood that greens there. But they would find them much more numerous and beautiful up there, in the midst of the ruins, where only eagles can go. Flowers, finally, that are a little fairy-like, for they come directly from the gardens of the beautiful Murette. The castle of Poix-Pagan, at the time when Murette lived, was the strongest in the area. Inaccessible on its rock and lost deep in an immense forest, inhabited by bears and wolves, one could only get there through perilous trails entangled like threads of a ball, and known only to the owners. The daring one who would have dreamed of assaulting it was condemned, without needing to be pushed back by weapons, to die, his path lost, under the teeth of the beasts or rolling down into some abyss. She was so divinely beautiful with her large black eyes and the long red hair, like that of the Madeleines, that anyone who caught a glimpse of her fell in love, which would have caused too many rivalries and wars in the country if she had made a choice. Murette's father, who was named Bautizar, and descended from a mage of the same name, as indicated on the coat of arms of the lords of Poix-Pagan, had a 7-pointed star that guided the 3 kings from the lands where day is born to the manger, did not ever want his daughter to leave her castle. The great deserted river that sometimes saw a galley adorned with oriflammes sail down it. Le Blonde who helped her tend them. However, Murette grew bored, always alone with her mirror, between 4 walls, with no other distractions than climbing the tallest tower to gaze afar, beyond the forest, at the brown or green plain, then yellow according to the season. The walled courts, cities, the villages perched on hilltops, the endless road where merchants and cavalcades passed, and, when she turned 12, behold, Perdigolet, unaware, poor innocent, fell in love with Murette. 2 things, however, consoled her from her imprisoned youth. a corner of the garden carved into the sharp rock, as land was scarce at the castle, where remarkable fiery-colored flowers grew, brought by the first pagan arriving by sea from Galilee. And alongside the flowers, the company of Perdigolet, the son of the gatekeeper, a charming litter. The old Balthazar realized this, and despite the tears of Moret, who also loved him but dared not say so, he decided to have Perdigolet killed. Why kill him? So kind and fair, sighed Moret. Wouldn't it be better just to lose him? Once down at the castle's base, in the woods, perhaps he can save his life? But in any case, without knowing the paths, he won't be able to return, and it will be as if he were dead. Perdigolet, the brave boy, had his plan. He wanted to come back, at least once, hiding until the door, to recognize the path and rescue Moret later when he felt grown and strong. Immerse. I will sleep in a tree, he thought, as soon as the soldiers abandon me, and I will rise at dawn so that the birds haven't had time to eat my seeds. And while they took him down, along the rocks, lost in the woods, in the dark night, Perdigolet scattered one by one small, glowing, hard seeds, the seeds of Moret's flowers that, upon the arrival of bad season, had wilted then seeded. But alas! Perdigolet wept, realizing he would never find the seeds or the path back, and that he would never see Moret again. Over our lands, where it had never snowed before, a heavy blanket of snow fell during the night that, by morning, hid the earth from view for 6 months. How did Perdigolet, so small and alone, without arms or hope, escape the danger of the forest? Through what adventures, battles, and feats did he return one day wearing a helmet and armor, dressed as a knight? That would be too long to tell. Let it suffice to know that seeing Moret's towers far away on his rock, beyond the impenetrable forest. Ah! Snow! Damn snow! He exclaimed. Without you, I would know my way, and today I would deliver my friend Moret, who was locked up. He was wrong, Perdigolet, very wrong to curse the snow. And then? For, when he entered the wood, he saw in the midst of the lawns and mosses a flower, then another flower, and these flowers of a magnificent red, as he had not seen any since leaving his homeland, were the same that shone above in the little garden of pagan. And as he advanced, it was like a purple carpet unfurling beneath his feet, guiding him straight to the castle. Then, with a heart full of hope and joy, he understood that these seeds saved from birds' beaks by the snow had sprouted, grown, flowered, that during his absence waiting for him they'd multiplied. Then, my children, it is likely that Balthazar gave his consent and Perdigolet married Moret. That was the old woman's tale. But I will tell you the end another time when you have reached the top of pagan following the Perdigolet path, where flowers still indicate the way after the return of spring. And never will anyone know what made me wear studded shoes and knee breeches, for on her word, during school days spent truant, we searched through brambles and rocks, always in vain, alas! Despite the presence of red flowers, the path to the magical garden of pagan was nowhere to be found. A diligent hunter I met en somme yesterday on the Champs-Élysées, after the canine exhibition. His presence in Paris only half surprised me. En somme is a great hunter, and whether it's a wedding of bassets or a trial of a new weapon, nothing that interests cynegetic art remains foreign to him. En somme came to me, grabbed my hand and broke it. You have certainly heard the news. Bleal preoccupied him, stood on end, unluckily short, and as if cut with scissors at a corner of an bitter smile. Despite my appearance, I felt sad, with teary eyes behind his unkempt eyebrows, and the mere sight of his buccaneer mustaches would have been enough to unveil the sorrowful secrets of his soul, for if the right mustache always fell gracefully and full of life below his chin, the left one, which he bit in an obstinate tick on days when some trouse. Has it been written to you? I had not heard the news, and no one had written to me. But in en somme's sorrowful tone, I immediately concluded that his brother, who had been ill for a long time, was dead, and, adopting an appropriate expression, I made a conscious effort to crush his hand in return. The blow was hard, continued the brave en somme, very hard. Friends became concerned. They advised me to travel, to distract myself, and, as you see, here I am. For a month, I remained stupefied, always dark and alone, not speaking, following the walls, and losing taste for everything, even hunting, and to think that it's my fault. Ooh, that it's these hands that poisoned him. The despair of this red giant did not seem feigned, and I, with the clumsiness of a man moved by words of sympathy, was seeking phrases when, interrupting me, he exclaimed, "My poor friend, what could you have done?" Alas! Unwittingly, with a sausage laced with strychnine I had left near my parents' forest, this winter, for the wolf's pasture. I remained silent, unable to explain how Mr. Ansume Sr., a serious man, could have poisoned himself with a sausage placed at the entrance to a wood. He was missing only speech. However, my interlocutor added, with a sigh that caused snow to fall on our hats, like a magical blue snow, the surprised flowers of the sapphires, "What a good dog." "And yet," he said after a pause, "even speech, he had it. Or even a stone marked with a cross. For now that he is dead, I don't think you don't believe Boreas ever sniffed out fur or feather during his long career as a dog." Only then did I realize that this tragic event was not about Mr. Ansume Sr., a notable merchant, but about Boreas, an astonishing dog who, without having the specific gift of speech as his master claimed, could keep a fresh egg in his mouth for a long time without breaking it, and faithfully bring back, instead of a hare, a handkerchief, a jock, eatable lands where they face certain death. Envy certainly did not lack in him, nor in his master, but both were from the South, and everyone knows that in the South dogs and hunters have acquired such a reputation for skill that rabbits and partridges have long since chosen to emigrate, and migratory birds prefer to make a long detour across Europe rather than risk venturing into Inhasp. At that time, I was studying rhetoric, that is to say, I held Anselm in boundless admiration, who was more than 10 years older than me, and so, since Anselm's encounter revived my memories, I will allow myself to tell a story in which I participated, and which will give an idea of how the Provençals in general, and my friend Anselm in particular, practice hunting. With even his whistling of Boreas through the street saw made Anselm for me the perfect hunter. His iron shoes and leg guards, his velvet jackets trimmed with buttons in the shapes of bears, deer, and wild boars, carrying on his back a hollow cavity capable of holding a load of game, his refined muzzle-loader rifle, his English-style haircuts, his discreet manner when talking about hunting, the mystery he surrounded his expeditions and catches. So imagine my joy on the afternoon when Anselm stopped. "Will you be staying at Plan de Pere? We'll have trout and a rear end of kid that the farmer has prepared, and I'll show you along the way how to catch a hare." Anselm didn't say I've killed a hare. He said I've harvested it, emphasizing the scientific precision of his hunting methods. The bad language of the country claimed that the hares of Anselm never ripened. He still said, "A hare awaits me in such a valley, at the foot of such a tuft of rosemary or gorse, but it will only be ripe in 8 days. But I was in the age of innocence and enthusiasm, and I attributed these basest insinuations to mere envy. It will be for tomorrow morning," I said, "and we'll pin it down in its lair. The true hour of the hare, you see, is when, feeling the first rays, it shakes its gray ears close to the ground to dislodge the dew." Yet, I must admit that on that day, the hare in question was not ripe or, incredibly, reluctant to be harvested, because we searched the plain and hillsides, hurled Boreas through every copse, and probed every bush with stones, but we did not catch sight of the hare's tail. Thus spoke, spreading into picturesque projects, my friend Anselm, radically rejuvenated by the small, fragrant wine, with a schist scent that we generously doused the hind quarter of roasted kid. And when rest time came, "Above all," he said to the farmer, "above all, don't forget to wake me up before dawn." As usual. "Yes, Mr. Anselm, as usual," replied the farmer with a smile that was at once sly and returned later, but which I did not notice at first. All night long, I dreamed of hares, enormous hares from all corners of the country that Boreas brought back, bloody in his mouth, and that Anselm, after reloading the gun, impassively jammed into the pocket at his rear, now as big as a mountain. When morning arrived, a gunshot, real or heard in my dream, I don't know, shook me, and I leapt out of bed, imagining Anselm had already left and was bagging the hare without me. But no. From the room next door, a steady and loud snore reached me, and there I found brave Anselm asleep fully clothed. "Anselm, Anselm, Monsieur Anselm, who's there?" "Present." "It's already grown light, Monsieur Anselm, and as I believe the farmer. But yes, it is light, scoundrel of a dawn, as long as the hare has waited. And you're still in your shirt? Quick! You should have slept under arms, slept with one eye open, like me. A drop of cognac and get into bed. Time presses. Will we be late for the hare, Monsieur Anselm?" As I hurried, a bit ashamed of my laziness, Anselm, from the top of the porch, was preparing the notebooks and playing with the seesaw crosses, while considering with strange frowns and an ill-hidden look of concern the horizon that was growing darker. Anselm was magnificent to behold, motionless and standing on the flame-like dawn. "It's the hare that worries me," Already towards the east, pink reflections ran to the crest of the mountains, then great golden gaps opened in the mist. Then the rays of the still invisible star spread out like a vermeil fan that covered half the sky. And Soame suddenly, uttering a formidable curse. "Curse it! What's happening over there?" I rushed. But what in the world is that? A volcano? Or, rather, the city burning, which did not prevent him, the other day on the Champs-Élysées, from adding in a perorative manner to his funeral oration of Boreas. Poor Boreas! Do you remember how sad he was that morning when, having woken too late, you made us miss a hare at the inn? Indeed, a globe of fire rose majestically behind the city walls to the great dread of brave Soame, diligent hunter, who, having passed 30 years without yet having had, it seems, an opportunity to observe this rare spectacle, naively took fee. Sunrise for a fire. Village life, have we pestered them enough, these unhappy southern French people, about their understanding of the countryside? Has Marseille been criticized enough for the innocent pleasure he takes in spending his leisure hours in a shack without shade or water, around which, from dawn to dusk, the cicadas sound off in frustration? And what of the Platonism of our hunts? Rocks dressed in nothing at all, meaning they are adorned with a magnificent cloak of light. He can, through the breach of a calanque, catch a distant glimpse, under a fixed and hard blue sky, of the mobile azure of the sea. The Marseillais smiled and passed by, thinking, as a son of Phocis, that too much greenery sometimes harms the Greek lines of a landscape, and truly happy when, between two pine trees with their twisted peaks letting sap drip, or between two slopes, planted with scraggly olive trees whose leaves shimmer in the passing wind, or even between two white. And the boastfulness of our fishes? Do we delight in these things? Man is the same everywhere. As if it were necessary to go to Marseille to meet hunters who kill nothing and imaginative fishers who, every time an ablet breaks their line, believe they have missed a whale. But let's get to our subject and leave Marseille behind, since it's about Parisians. For him, in Paris or Marseille, whether it's hunting or love, fishing or glory, the reality counts for little, and what matters is the illusion. But the road workers know me. They'll show you the way. Cressonnières. For a long time, La Dieuville, an old comrade, has been telling me, so come see me one day at my castle in Cressonnières. It's quite difficult to find, past garches in the middle of the woods. Well, no, it wasn't like that. Nearby there was a sandy quarry blocked with thistles and brambles. Just the name seems like a description. And I promised myself in advance, near a little cottage with a disjointed porch, a spring crying among the moss, then becoming a small stream, then suddenly widening and taking on the airs of a pond under a green vegetation where sometimes a hole is dug, slow to close, the fleeting leap of a frog. Imagine, in the heart of the forest, but in a place stripped bare by exception and completely devoid of trees, imagine a low one-story building, poorly painted with lime wash, unkempt pear trees, groseilliers without fruit. What do you think of it? Exclaimed La Dieuville. Flower beds crying out for water through the thousands of holes in their dried clay, where a few sunflowers that had remained perennial among the dying flowers gave the entire scene a particularly dull and forlorn appearance of a guard barrier. Garden, picturesque, but a bit bare. Not at all, I replied. I'm not bored. The wildness of the place pleases my soul. And is this what they call the Cressonnières? Yes, indeed, she said, by way of antithesis, for within 4 kilometers in every direction, I challenge you to find even a wet spot or a fountain where cresson could grow green. Anne offered me a cigar, and La Dieuville had the kindness to let me admire in detail that cramped domain and its misanthropic horizons. Something shines over there, at the foot of the hills, through the trees. Yet, haunted by ideas of freshness evoked in my mind by that accursed name, the Cressonnières, I felt the need to see some water. That silver ribbon? It's the Seine. You can reach it from Jonchère, alongside St. Cucuffa's ponds. So let's go to the ponds, let's go to the Seine. We'll go, since you want it, sighed La Dieuville. We're quite comfortable here. But before we leave, I need to water something. I wondered in perplexity what the devil he would water with. I didn't even see a cistern. La Dieuville, smiling, already ascended from the cellar, carrying 2 siphons in each hand and under each arm. What do you think of this invention? You wouldn't believe how handy it is. Now, guess what La Dieuville was doing. By small, dry jets, sparingly but conscientiously, La Dieuville, an innocent agronomist, was watering his flowers with seltzer water. Do they live around here? Yes, near the Cucufa pond, bordered by tall reeds that the breeze entwines, and similarly, under his flowering of water lilies, like a crystal sky studded with silver stars, La Dieuville suddenly said to me, "Meet Prosper, Marius, and Pontellet. They've rented something halfway between La Selle and Bougival. Fisherman and hunter, each can thus follow his pleasure without bothering the other. Fortune favored us." At that moment, a solid, robust man with a red beard emerged from a path through the woods. It's Pontellet. He had iron-soled boots, strong leggings, and was followed by a large dog. The true atavistic type of these men with clear eyes, golden hair, who joyfully, in the ancient forests of Gaul, attacked the aurochs with the cleaver. Let's watch him. I don't see any weapons on him. How does he hunt? He has a wind gun in his cane. Strange hunting. The dog had just stopped in front of the gate of a villa. Pontellet, with the precautions of red skin, approached the gate, aimed through the bars, and fired. We heard a clear sound like that of a broken glass. "And 15!" exclaimed Pontellet, who, finally having noticed us, was coming towards us, hands outstretched. 15 what? I asked with some curiosity. 15 of these polished balls that the Paris bourgeoisie has the habit of dishonoring the lawns of its gardens. I'm a hunter, as you know. But there's no way to hunt here, all of the forests being rented by big German bankers. So I came up with the idea of avenging myself on the balls. I've already destroyed quite a few. People of taste will appreciate it. This kind of hunting is both hygienic and humanitarian. One becomes interested, one becomes passionate. But hush! Here comes Fanor taking up the trail. We will meet in a little while by the water's edge. I still had to see Marius. We found him sitting under a willow, with his feet dangling, on the right side of the bridge, with a complete fishing gear spread out next to him in the grass. "Hello, Marius. Is there any bite?" Serious, attentive, silent, and not distracted by the music blasts from the neighboring dance hall, nor by the jests that cannotiers and bare arms threw at him as they passed by, he cast into the water, one after another, boiled peas that he took out, of a mysterious little bag every second. You see for yourself that I'm not fishing. So you're baiting? Baiting? Me! Only ignorant fishermen bait. A baited fish no longer has hunger, and having no hunger, it doesn't bite. Indeed, the reasoning seems clear to me. What in the world is that? These beans emitted a bitter and foul odor. Marius, flattered, held his bag of beans under my nose. This, my friend, is simply boiled beans in an aloe decoction. Poor dame, poor Italie. Well, no one had ever thought of it. With this, instead of stuffing the fish, I purge them, and you can imagine how hungry the roachfish, the barbels, and the carp will be tomorrow at dawn. It's natural, isn't it? He continued. Since this idea came to me, I've been having amazing catches. As soon as I throw it out, they're hooked. The fish devour my lines. Do you laugh? He said. Ask Pontellet, ask La Dieuville. Moirne. So I remained alone with Marius along the river, spearing carp. But La Dieuville, worried, thought about retrieving his watercress and flowers, while Pontellet, eager to get back hunting, didn't want to miss the propitious hour, when the polished balls lit up under the red rays of the setting sun. A drape of hunting, I would like to be that hunter. What hunter? And so delighted to have discovered near Paris a fisherman so inventively ingenious, a so fanciful hunter, a so chimerical agronomist, I forgot the original task and almost consoled myself for being from the south. You know him. He's stout, well-muscled, his figure cooked like a brioche, the right eye, the one that aims. So heavy. To send them to the mint to be melted one day of disaster. Wide open, the left eye always half-closed due to long habit, under his gun-barrel nose, a real running dog nose, a pair of drooping mustaches pulling at his cheeks, mustaches made of solid gold. Heavy. He wears yellow leather jambiers, well-laced, showing off the muscles, and a boiled leather cap hats linger on branches. Heroic hunting scenes, boars with tusks, deer with antlers. Add the game bag with its white string net, lead pouch, powder horn, and a new model rifle made especially in New York, which loads itself and doesn't need to be loaded through the muzzle or breech. His panties made of devil's skin, unbreakable, can withstand the thorns. His shoes, cut from the hide of a crocodile, have high heels like a platform and wide soles like a promenade. His wild cat-colored velvet jacket, to not scare the beast in the thair. Woods is studded with innumerable pockets closed by countless buttons that decorate in bas-relief. Thus equipped, He arrives at the cafe and sits down. Waiter, an absinthe. Look at the terrace. Is that understandable? No wonder, with the bad will of the companies. He was going to make the opening. He missed the train. Always the same thing. He rumbles. One hurries. The establishment is full of its glory. I would like to be that hunter. Rapivines. To kill animals? God forbid. Not that I feel the cruel desire to go disturb the sleepy rest of the rabbits under the tall, gold-tipped birch trees, nor to target the white rear end of a rabbit darting into its sandy burrow, or to machine-gun the partridge singing between two furrows, or the lark, carelessly ignoring the phylloxera, happily getting drunk in the shadow of the G. I think I would rather raise them. But it would be sweet to me, I admit, dressed as a hunter, and with the missed train, to sit like this, in front of this cafe, pipe in my mouth, my gun on my left knee. We know all your hunting stories, and we are going to tell you one that will surely surprise you. And there, letting minute after minute escape from my lips, at the same time as a little blue cloud, the expression of my satisfied superiority, I would tell you. She is authentic. I learned it from my grandfather, a brave man, a great hunter, and who never lied. Don't expect anything moving or heroic. So this is how bears were hunted in our region about 50 years ago, when they still roamed the small Alps. Describe the hairy monster, its sharp teeth, its long claws, paint a hand-to-hand struggle, the torn buffalo coat, the blades flash, blood running red on the snow, of course. All that would be easy if I wanted to embroider a little, but my grandfather had no imagination, and I am simply repeating his simple tale. A bit daring, someone might say. Still an unusual hunt, a peasant woman hunting without knife, spear, or gun, where the hunter contented himself with offering a rope to the game, asking it to go along willingly. Not at all, as simple as can be, quite the opposite. Just don't interrupt. Count on. I begin the story. They were supposed to hunt the bear. My grandfather, having been invited, had brought his rifle, naturally. But still, the peasants said, powder is expensive and the lead damages the skin. It's better to have the beast without all these trickeries. Wait a minute! The peasants knew exactly what they wanted to do. He happily indulges in them straight from the tree, biting into them raw when he can't do otherwise, but he prefers them cooked with honey. A dripping nut hung in front of the trunk opening. Those sacred Provençal mountain people, as fine as amber beneath their thick canvas vests, had observed two things since time immemorial. First, that the bear is both reasonable and stubborn. Second, that he loves above all else to have stewed pears for lunch. So they had prepared a large plate of pears and honey for the bear in question and placed it, at muzzle height, in the hollow of an old wild pear tree where the animal would come every morning, at dawn, to sharpen its appetite with some green pears. A dripping nut? Well, what a clever trick. Be patient. You'll see everything in due time if it's well thought out, I said, a dripping nut tied by the end to a sturdy log, heavy enough to inconvenience the bear once he drags it around his neck, but not enough to choke him. At daybreak as planned. Having done that, everyone sat down and they started smoking pipes. The bear appeared, emerging from a small wood. He walked slowly and stretched occasionally, like someone waking up. Arriving at the tree, he stopped, looked at the branches, sniffed in the crevice. Evidently he thought to himself, who on earth has taken care of roasting my pears for me? Then, having perhaps reflected that cooked pears are much better than raw ones, he decided to do justice, without further ceremony, to the delicious lunch served to him by Providence itself, the bear. When he had finished, he licked his lips. Then he trotted off towards the stream nearby to go and drink. The log, as one might expect, set off in a run behind him, at the end of its rope. The bear returned to find the log and grumbled. In his bear language this meant, "You're boring me." Then, convinced that the log had understood, he resumed his interrupted trot. The log followed again. "Wait a bit," he said. "If it's like this, I'll show you the way." And leaving his trot behind, he set off merrily at the gallop. The log followed him down the path, tearing through the bushes, mowing down the grass, smashing into trees and rocks, and drawing tremendous leaps through the air. The bear stopped, blew, spoke to the log again, rolling it from side to side with his paws, then sat in a meditative and bored manner, trying to figure out what to do about such an obnoxious character. Finally he rubbed his paws as if to say, "I've got it!" Indeed, the bear had an idea, a bear's idea, as we will see. He took the log in his arms and started carrying it, walking gravely on his hind legs. He traversed this burden through a forest, a plain, a river. The entire village followed him. He encountered a well, looked into it, and passed by. The well was not deep enough for what he wanted to do. A cray-colored ledge ending the plateau seemed to engage him further. After reflection, he renounced the ledge. The slope was a little too gentle, and the log might roll back. Finally, he found a spot admirably suitable for stopping the log. It was a sheer cliff, 100 feet high, at the bottom of which a torrent roared. "Good journey," the bear seemed to say as he launched the log. Clinging to a large bush my grandfather is speaking, I watched. The log went flying, the rope from the knot stretched taut, and the bear, probably astonished, tumbled head over heels. The bear was not dead. He was climbing back among the rocks, slightly lame, with blood at his nostrils, but obstinate in his idea and carrying the log he intended to throw again. 3 times he hurled it, the village rejoiced. On the 4th time, "But that's enough. I can see you laughing." The hunter tells his stories, and no one laughs. He imposes with his brick-red complexion, flickering eye, gun-barrel nose, and mustache. He has a lead sack, a powder horn, and a rifle. A velvet jacket with decorated buttons, leather culottes, crocodile shoes, a game bag, and gauntlets. He sips his absinthe after missing the train. The cashier smiles. A dog comes to sniff him. The boss's kids, fingers in their noses, watch him. I would like to be that hunter. The lobster for 8 days. Only hunters have been celebrated, which is unfair. And, to strengthen his courage, momentarily shaken before the impressive and sudden departure of a company of partridges. Will it be permitted here to remind everyone of the parallel existence of fishers, a more modest but powerful caste in Paris, silent like the fish they catch, not affecting warrior-like attitudes, but hiding, just as they do under their deliberately unassuming exterior, true heroes with haughty and passionate souls. All passion indicates grandeur, and humanity, fortunately, is made such that the pursuit, through the frisking waves, of a carp and a minnow sets in motion sublime sensations equal to those experienced, for instance, by a general on the morning of battle, or even the hunter when, with rifle shouldered and ready to fire, he tries, in the supreme secours. As for me, I am entitled only to the considerable title of honorary fisherman. Unworthy disciple, too late initiated into the sacred art, I know little of anything but the external pleasures, the marginal joys, if I may express myself thus. But I associate with fishermen who fish, which allows me to speak. Echoed on the water, the sound of washboards, and the brief cry of that red and blue kingfisher which, soaring above the reeds of the small branch, shoots like an arrow from one bank to the other. That is to say, the pleasure of descending, in peace and freshness, a river whose crystal reflects the uniform azure of the sky and the verdant shiver of its banks, at those quiet hours when fishermen and landscape artists alike seek their effect. The joy, all alone beneath the willow, while comrades bait their hooks, to listen to the waves' calls. I had the honor of joining them under rather picturesque circumstances. 2 in particular. Nestor, who should not be confused with the penetrating and delicate moralist whose Gil Blas chronicles are published, my friend Nestor and Levoir. Best to be one. A few years ago, wandering through the woods, a breeze carried to me a distant sound like a horn. I listened, but the horn fell silent. Was it an assembly of fairies? Shortly after, I heard it again, and started walking in the direction of this mysterious horn that sounded in intervals. Or was I witnessing a swift ride by hunting chatelaines, glistening among the birches, on the golden background of mosses and rust-colored leaves? Great was my surprise when, upon reaching the edge of a lake near an abandoned mill with its idle wheel covered in grass, I saw 2 men engaged in an unexpected task. One had a fishing line and caught fish. The other, holding a horn, stuffed his fist into the bell, lips ready to blow, watched him intently. Cast net fishing, why not? And each time the man with the line pulled out a fish, the man with the horn sounded a triumphant fanfare. It was Nestor who, teaching Levoir, the novice, allowed a little music as a distraction. For Nestor is not one of those anglers who, when they fish, want silence as deadly as a tomb to reign around them. Nestor knows that the fish, indifferent to airborne noises, only fears those that spread in the water. So with him, while baiting, you can talk, sing, laugh, and even play the horn if necessary. Just be careful not to scrape your feet too hard against the boat's plank bottom, and Nestor will be content. This is out of reason, not weakness. I won't blame him. Like politics, fishing has its state reason. On the contrary, Nestor brings an unwavering and cold energy to fishing matters that sometimes borders on cruelty. Nothing in their attire betrayed them as fishermen. Nestor disliked being noticed. One day, Nestor and Levoir, who had become inseparable, were traveling by wagon to a little-known village that was, however, crossed by an ultra-abundant river they had promised to depopulate. The pieces of reed and cuttings, wrapped in a piece of green luster, were modestly concealed. They went on in silence, Nestor calmly as ever, Levoir slightly anxious. This is why Levoir was anxious. The lines made of horsehair, those of root, coiled around the spools, with their spare hooks and multicolored buoys, the essential lead weight of the sonar, the forked rod used to lift a hooked fish too far forward, were all hidden in a case quite similar to a cartridge holder that Nestor wore as a pendant. It was precisely that day to experiment with a bait whose secret, Nestor claimed, he had just rediscovered in an ancient manuscript from the National Library, a river where the hook awaited them. And it was for the preparation of the aforementioned bait, now stuffed under the bench, that Nestor and Levoir, patient like alchemists, had spent their entire night grinding strange and foul-smelling drugs. With this lure, of unparalleled reach and power, roach, perch, and gurnard, lured from several kilometers away, would rise from the depths of the excavations and cliffs where they usually hide from the light of day, ascending from the mouth and descending from the source, in ever hungrier and tighter schools, until they reached the exact point in T. But Nestor, scornful, this. At first, Levoir had daringly suggested, "If, compared to the bait, we went up with the smokers, for my verse worms, my maggots, and my cooked wheat to poison the nicotine." And Levoir, as always, had yielded. Yet, for a few minutes, in the compartment shaken by the train's movement and overheated by the sun, an undefinable scent spread. The ladies, taking out their handkerchiefs, lowered the window panes. The men looked at each other with sinister expressions and suspiciously at one another. Levoir thought, "Goodness, our bait is working." But despite the ventilators being open, sucking in torrents of air from the train and the scents from the forests and plains successively crossed, the odor persisted, growing worse, and more cruelly piercing the nostrils. Nestor blinked his eye and seemed to reply, "Let it be, the bait will only be better." However, the scent had become physically unbearable. They spoke of conducting searches. How to save the precious bait? Nestor paid with audacity. "I don't understand," he exclaimed, "that on such a hot day people would transport lobsters so far by train." Interrupted like this, the old lady opened her basket. At the same time, cynically, he pointed with his gaze at the indignation of everyone towards a poor old woman carrying a basket from which indeed emerged two long antennae. "But it's fresh, my lobster. I bought it live from the market just 3 hours ago. It was moving. Its tail was flapping." "By Jove!" he replied. "The game is up, my good lady. You've been swindled by cooking the lobster. And I paid 6 francs for it. Yes, 6 francs to make a surprise." This would have probably softened a tiger, but Nestor did not soften. The obviously fresh lobster was magnificent to behold beneath its scarlet armor, and the old woman, childishly moved, with her pink shell bonnet and her light silver frills, sighed, "My God, what a—" Nestor calmly took the lobster, sniffed it, and then, with a grimace of disgust, passed it around from hand to hand among the assembly. "Faint?" "I believe you," she replied. Suggested by his will, hypnotized by his gaze, everyone repeated the grimace, and even the old lady herself could not help saying, "It's true. I don't understand. It has some sort of faint smell. So please throw your lobster out the door before the whole train is asphyxiated." "Wait, madam," he said, after careful consideration. "It might be from our box." Nestor rolled his eyes terribly, and the old lady, still sighing, "What a pity," was about to throw her lobster out when Levoir, overcome with sudden remorse, stopped her. "Here's your bait. That's what matters. Come on, Nestor. We can admit it since the train is arriving at the station." "Then our day would have been lost." Nestor forgives, but not without protesting. "So, for a miserable lobster, would we have had to go a station or 2 further? With your stupid sentimentalities, you'll never have the heart of a fisherman." And, shrugging his shoulders, he added, "Listen, Levoir, a piece of advice. From today on, give up teasing the blenny. Dog of an blind man, sir." "Hey, sir!" I turned at this call, uttered in a hesitating voice, and saw standing in the middle of the grass an old man gesturing with his staff. "Excuse me, sir," continued the old man, "but I am blind, and for more than an hour now I have been at this place. You are the first whose footsteps I heard on the pebbles." Twerk of oblique short-cuts was certainly the most solitary. Of the 5 or 6 streets or boulevards that, planted along the old moats, form a verdant belt around the crumbling ramparts of the city, The Boulevard de Lices with its triple row of bushy, knotted elms from which enormous caterpillars rain in summer, and its paths choked with thick grass through which the habit of rare passers-by traces a nen. Moreover, the proximity of the cemetery aligning its cypresses there, a painted red hut that was once the executioner's home, and two houses always strangely closed, but which, at night, light up in the shadow lanterns for some drunken gunner cast. Disquieting aura over this neighborhood. The bourgeois walkers avoided it, preferring, indeed, by simple taste, the correct new avenue that led from the bridge to the station, and I was not surprised that an unfortunate blind man who had strayed there remained for a long time without finding anyone to speak to. However, the blind man asked me if I knew the country, and on my affirmative answer, he begged me to conduct him to the dog pound. On the way, the blind man told me his adventure. The dog pound was indeed not far away, and I was wrong to forget it in the list of establishments more or less repulsive and shady that are the ordinary decor of our provincial suburbs. Expensive. As a bread-seeker by profession outside Paris, the blind hardly exercise any other. The night before, in company with his dog who also suffered from the heat and was licking his lips, he had come up with the idea of refreshing himself by passing in front of a modest cabaret where they sell a little lively wine that tastes of grapes and is not brie. For they took him, sir, they dragged him away. Even if one is poor, one can still feel thirsty after running from farm to farm all morning in the dust of major roads. Unfortunately, he had fallen asleep, and scoundrels took advantage of his slumber to cut the dog's leash and take it away. Such a good dog, sir. As he remained alone, our man despaired, but some horse drivers agreed to give him a ride. I called him Bourriquet out of friendship, and because sometimes in our discussions, when he set his mind on leading me where I didn't want to go, he was as stubborn as a man. In short, the road worker saw three gentlemen in rather bad shape, looking like city dwellers, laughing after a poor decision, dragging a sheepdog towards the city. As soon as he arrived, he gathered information from everywhere. People told him that indeed a terrified dog, without a collar, looking like a blind dog, was running through the streets. I didn't know, sir. It seems to be a place where they lock up dogs without owners. He had been searching for Bourriquet for 2 days, and as Bourriquet couldn't be found, someone advised him to go to the pound. They kill them, do you understand? If they're not claimed within 24 hours. As long as Bourriquet wasn't there yesterday? But Bourriquet is clever. He only knows me, and the fellow wouldn't have let himself be caught so easily. The blind man walked, still talking, trying to distract himself, to deceive himself, but I could see that deep down in his soul he was very worried about Bourriquet's fate. This building was sinister, and its appearance, if he had seen it, would have finished discouraging the poor man. As we neared our destination, his words became more moved, and he suddenly turned pale when I stopped and said, "It's right here." A small courtyard preceding a round tower that used to be part of the fortifications. On the door, a black inscription, "Dog Pound." We rang. An employee with a peaked cap came to open. He recognized me, and suddenly became friendly, and when the dogs entered, as they were said to do, they could smell their death, as the pound was next to a slaughterhouse. A dog for a blind man, shaven like a lion, with a tuft at the end of its tail? No, I don't remember such a dog. But one can always see. You understand, we get so many. Orders have been very strict lately due to rabies. They did not bark at our approach. And smiling, he led us to the corner of the courtyard where, in an open kennel, some poor dogs, still unclaimed, waited for their fate. Resigned and melancholic, they watched us with a soft eye. The blind man called Bourriquet, but Bourriquet did not answer. "Here," said the official, "are all the dogs caught yesterday." "And the ones from the day before?" "Oh, those are accounted for, since this morning they no longer need kibble. Just to be sure, if by chance, nothing easier, he was told, they're right here. The boy next door was late and hasn't received his yet." Unable to hide his foreboding any longer, the blind man, in a voice choked with emotion, asked, "Would it be possible to see them?" In our shamefully backward province, civilized methods of dog control honored by science are not used. They do not asphyxiate them with carbon monoxide. Instead, they strangle them the old-fashioned way. A ray of sunlight entered through a window, thin and blinding like a rod of red-hot iron, and this ray splashing gold onto the dirty red tiles added to the macabre horror of the scene. Nauseated, I tried to lead the blind one. "Let's go." Around the vaulted and round room, hanging from hooks fixed in the wall. Half a dozen dogs hung with their necks tightly tied with ropes, their bodies stiffened, tongues drawn back, displaying those lamentably comic postures that the gallows seemed to give both animals and men. "Your Bourriquet isn't here." But the blind man refused, suspicious. He had his own ideas and wanted to know for himself. Slowly, with his trembling hands, he felt each corpse one by one. Sometimes he hesitated, afraid of recognizing Bourriquet. A closer examination reassured him. On the third, a poodle with frizzy fur, I saw him shiver and start over, very moved, his silent investigation. He said to us, "I was very afraid. This one looks like him, but it's not him." Then, when he reached the last one, with a sigh of relief, "You are brave people. I thank you. Just think, if Burro could have died like this, I wouldn't have slept all night. But now, if a sheepdog comes and turns out to be Burro, we won't kill him, since I claim him in advance." The employee promised and added, "Madam, and hold on. That's your right, if you want to come here every morning. I advise you to wait. The sun is setting, and the cart won't be long in returning with today's game." 2 men escorted it, armed with laces and ropes. He was right. The cart arrived, preceded by the sound of a huge bell that, behind the gates, at the threshold of the doors, awoke a concert of furious barking as it passed. Once in front of the kennel, he lowered the swinging gate that made the cart look like a giant witch's chariot. But the prisoners, suspecting something, didn't want to come out. "Bourriquet, are you there?" the blind man whispered. A dog leapt forward, barking with joy. "Ah! Bourriquet! Ah, the fool, who got caught in the end." Bourriquet was already stretching his neck for the leash, licking the hands that held him. "Go, Bourriquet, far from these cities where men hang dogs." And as I discreetly settled the kennel fees, I heard the blind man cry, "Go, Bourriquet, lead us ahead, always straight on into the country." The cats. Truly, the craze is for cats. 2 rows of tiny teeth, a piece of cute pink tongue. Thanks to ingenious trainers, they know the honors of the circus. And all this winter, we have been able to see them. Among the applause, under the shivering joy of the lights, oppose their flexible exercises to those of the gymnasts in pink leotards and painted black clowns. It is even said that as a result of these triumphant acrobatics, the cat, in the world of gallantry, would tend to replace, like an applauded actor, this ball of crimped and white silk where gleam 2 diamonds which are the eyes, from which emerges a miniature of truffle which is the nose, with, underneath, as they say in a refined style, between. Certainly, transformed thus by selection and culture, the animal, which was once a dog, becomes some sort of toy, still living a vague life, still endowed with a hint of intelligence and obscure affection, all pleasantly microscopic and quite at home among the skin-deep loves, laughable dramas, and fragile elegances of a boudoir. I don't know what the future holds for the cat or what will result from this new situation. But how much better a voluptuous harmony that man had understood, how much better will it do rolling in the mysteries of the same boudoir, near a pale, civilized one whose sole function is caressing, the cat, a silently attractive and caressable creature with its entire body, accepting our customs to the extent he desires, and, through the unsettling questioning of his gaze, the regal indolence of his movements, the playful aggression of his claws, enjoying reminding us that the wild woods were his first home, and that there is still a tiger within him. But while waiting for a poet analyst, a feline emule of Paul Bourget, to fix in a few masterful and definitive pages the delicate physiology of the modern cat, I wanted to note, captured in the moment, 2 or 3 observations made to characterize the old cat, the semi-rustic cat as we know it in families, allied with man, not his slave only, which does not prevent him, on occasion, from displaying the most subtle mind, the most vivid imagination, and sometimes, to those who accuse him of selfishness, the most exquisite sensitivity. I once lived in an old provincial house that was a true paradise for cats because of its long and dark corridors, cluttered cupboards full of antiques and furniture, its never-visited attics completely suitable for secret installations, nocturnal sabbats, furious battles, with countless exits towards the freedom of the roof, sacred asylum, inviolable. This blissful house had 3 cats, or more precisely, 1 tomcat and 2 kittens. L'Observatory, from which one contemplates, purring all day long beyond the last houses, the green belt of fields, and in the evening, the infinite blue dotted with stars. The tomcat, a great fighter before the eternal, with a scarred nose and shredded ears like lace, had the most magnificent ebony fur and proudly bore the name Moricod. He had indeed become famous through a rather singular adventure. "A 50-foot jump, please," rolled from the top of a roof during some romantic expedition. He was picked up, quite badly hurt, unable to move anything but his front legs and dragging himself pitifully on the pavement, like an inert weight, with the rear part of his body. The competent old women declared that he had a broken backbone, and to spare him unnecessary suffering, it was decided that a neighbor, a man known for having a hard heart, would lock Moricod in a basket and throw him off the bridge, into a roaring torrent of water, even colder than usual at this time of year when the snow is melting. Despite the old women's diagnosis, Moricod had broken nothing upon landing. His masters thought he was dead and already mourned him when, 2 hours after the execution, he returned, wet but proud like Artaban, vigorous like a saber and sound in all 4 limbs. Moricod therefore emerged from his perilous cold bath as a believer is said to emerge from the pool at Lourdes. His case, as the illustrious Professor Charcot deigned to explain to me, a philosopher as well as a learned physician, and in this double capacity a great contemplator of nature and a great friend of animals, his case must have been one of those curious cases of hysterical paralysis often caused by a shock, and sometimes cured by a violent emotion. This simple fact will prove it. A cat with such an imaginative mind could not lack spirit. Where on earth had he gone? One day, Moricod failed to answer the call. The original house in question still had, at the end of its corridor, an ancient doorbell that was no longer in use. After long announcing visitors, but now replaced by a modern chime, it served mostly to summon for the distribution of mousetraps. Cats lingering in the attics or wandering along the gutters. Set in motion by a piece of string, the doorbell could be heard from far away, and the cats, without any prompting, rushed to its familiar sound, probably where cats go when love teases them. No! But suddenly, in the middle of the night, the doorbell began to chime alone. People were alarmed. They hurried. Was there a ghost in the house? How could one not love cats? The heart was as grand as the mind. It was simply Moricod, back and hungry, who had hung himself from the string and was ringing like a drunk bell-ringer, hoping to summon someone to feed him. Although time is pressing and the paper waiting to be filled diminishes, I will not put down my pen without telling you about the same cats, a touching story that proves that in them, misconstrued, slandered by their likes, their purrs were rewarded with caresses. The grandfather loved his cats dearly, and his cats loved him just as much. They proved it to him every evening when he returned from the cafe, by running to meet him up to the corner of the next street, all 3 tails aloft. Then, the cats would resume their walk, leading the grandfather to the door, all 3 tails aloft. As in so many other houses, there lived a grandfather in the house of the cats. An old man, nearly 80 years old but still robust, who would under no circumstances have missed going every day to drink his glass, smoke his pipe, and play his game of cards at the cafe at the end of town before dinner. Unfortunately, at the beginning of winter, the grandfather fell ill. He was prescribed absolute rest, his room was sealed off, and the cats did not see him again. One day, an old bread searcher about the same age as the grandfather passed through the town, and with his cane, white beard, frayed but very clean clothes, he was not without resembling him. They did not know what had become of their friend. And every evening, at the usual time, they would go to the corner of the next street, wait for a moment, then turn back with drooped tails and sorrowful expressions, a behavior that surprised and edified the entire neighborhood. He was just passing by at the usual time of the grandfather, and the cats, seeing him coming, were tricked. All in a row, their 3 tails up, they went to meet the poor man, passed between his legs, and he, caressing them, murmured, "Lord, my God, brave cats." Then they started walking ahead of him, to the great surprise of the poor man who, none the less, followed them. He followed them to the door of the dining room, which, according to custom in certain provinces, was on the ground floor, facing the street. And as dinner was served, to show no less charity than the cats, they honestly invited the poor man to take a place at the table, even in the grandparents' chair. And the old poor man would always say, with great appetite, "Lord, my God! What a good city, where they send such brave cats to show you the way." The good drunkard this vine made me dream, opening up like that against the gray wall, on a cold day already shivering and crucified. Further north, the vine stops growing. This one is the last in the country. So what pride does the good man in boots, who adorns his thatched cottage with it, show to his neighbors, bare canes and thin grape clusters that seem to be waiting for the frost to ripen them. She made me dream, this exiled vine, as a symbol of the rustic paganism of old and the respect our ancestors had for the sacred plant. But for years now, vines have been dying, and angry Bacchus has withdrawn from us, making a great noise, pulled by men. Not long ago, during grape harvesting season, when wine carts returned along rocky paths with their empty bins, you would have thought, looking to the horizon, that drums and tambourines from some distant bacchanal were echoing. Even before winter, ancient-looking presses, purple with the residue of the vats, went back and forth in front of houses. Yet the tradition of a richer past was preserved. People spoke of mysterious plagues that, very early on, perhaps even during the time of the marble she-wolf, who, according to the proverb, ate everything, forced them to uproot their vines. Nevertheless, there was wine for everyone back then, even for the poor. They showed brick vats, enormous, like towers and stone barrels, solid blocks of stone, now dry, and which would not have been enough to fill the harvest of an entire province. And yet, as irrefutable witnesses of an era when wine truly flowed like streams in the streets, they showed in their cellars, under vaults encrusted with saltpeter, draped in cobwebs, smelling of all sorts of mold, so high that the lamp drew a circular light in the middle of the shadow, without managing to illuminate them. Those of my generation still remember. In peasant neighborhoods, at the threshold of doors, a table covered with a white cloth, with an iron jug and a goblet on top, invited passers-by to refresh themselves without paying. All is now well, and, on the word of the bearded taster, the old men would go one day to Antique, another day elsewhere, to drink the recommended wine, nibbling fresh nuts and olives. Every evening, at the time when people returned from the fields, a boy would go off blowing his trumpet and crying out at the crossroads, "Who wants to drink real new wine, at 2 sous a liter, should go to Antique, behind the church. The wine is good, behind the church. I've tasted it. Not only does the mother vine produce little anymore, but infamous sophisticators, in league with our deputies, try to mix their poisons with the last drops of purple milk flowing from her withered breast. Habit has now taken hold, and poets and philosophers can already observe its results. Besides, whether authorized or not, whether clandestine or legal, we will not escape vintage. One of the saddest things, undoubtedly, is the loss of intoxication. Do you remember that good drunkard? There was usually one drunkard per village, just one. For the amiable inebriation of old has become an illness, and, replaced by the lead-faced alcoholic, haunted by deadly visions, our good drunkard, the kind drunkard, has vanished with the good wine. Happy, harmless, we dreamt of him crowned with autumnal purples and rich folds, a pretty red like his ruby complexion. This gave the jovial man a sort of privilege, and almost a duty. Sometimes, in a moral or controversial mood, the priest would stop the drunkard on his way. Cheerfully, the drunkard would defend himself with bold puns, quoting the Bible and Gospel, Noah, the wedding at Cana. But deep down, the priest was not keen to convince him, content to have this hardened sinner on the dock to strike in his sermons. I knew one of these good drunkards, and even today, or some years, his memory remains dear to me. We were leaving school when, one day, we encountered him. He was slightly unsteady on his feet, but dignified, carefully making his way along the closest houses. As disrespectful of medicine as it was of the church, it was still told that the good drunkard, after falling ill and being condemned, had cured himself radically, without prescriptions or drugs, by administering to himself a succession of hot wines, made from old grapes. "This is Barnabas, we should follow him." Oh, so we followed him, with a school bag on his back, while dinner waited at our parents' house. To be precise, the road was long. Whether it was calculation or instinct, Barnabas, suspicious of wide spaces and eager to always have a wall at hand, led us for an hour through a network of narrow alleyways. Finally, we saw him stop in front of an inn where a green buxus hung. He hesitated, then, rummaging through his pocket, he threw into the stream the few coins that were left to him. This resolve filled us with joy, first because the less shameful ones picked up the coins, and also because Barnabas mewingly threw away his coins when he had decided to return to the house. And the entrance promised, between his wife Scholastique and him, an amusing comedy. Silently, the good drunkard bowed his head under the storm. Old Scholastique was weaving on her porch. Here you are. Oh, children-eater, party-dreamer, beyond bad suing. Scholastique resumed, "Gettin' into such a state? Go to the stable, find your kind." Barnabas first tried, a very risky attempt to climb the 4 steps of the porch. Barnaby had to have his idea. What was Barnaby's idea? But, having stumbled, he did not insist, and resigned with a smile that seemed to say, "After all, Barnaby visiting his pig. The adventure became amusing. Barnaby sat down on a pile of straw near the window. We heard grunting sounds, and soon we saw Barnaby reappear dragging his big charge by the ear. First, paternally, he stroked the donkey. He stroked the goat busy in a corner, gnawing on the bark and leaves of an almond tree bundled up. Then, after unhooking a latch, he entered, bent double, into the small niche that had been dug out beneath the staircase. "The woman is right. You're better than me. Rest your head on my groin. Put your shackles in my legs." While trying to press the animal that, desperately, resisted against his heart, Barnaby said gentle words. "Don't be afraid, oh unique friend." "What? You're scolding me. That's wrong." Finally, the pig escaped. As if struck in his dearest affections, Barnabas was deeply affected and tears filled his eyes. Said Barnabas, instantly consoled, leaving Scholastique, who, stern-faced, in the doorway had listened to the end of this strange scene, to chase after the fugitive, holding aloft her broom, more disheveled than usual. "There they are, friends." On that note, Barnaby dozed off, snoring so loudly that it threatened to send the flies flying in the sun. Then, lying down in the straw, he added, with a touch of philosophy, "All this won't stop you from serving me, come Christmas, by polishing my lips, for nothing beats salted meat to make good wine taste right. The farmer's wife, once upon a time in Luzency, not far from Ferté-sous-Jouarre, there was an old woman, so old that all her parents were dead. They called her Ella Sempiterne, although her true name was Widow Gogi. And while he dreamt of some splendid New Year's Eve, enormous brock pits around which sausages and boudins entwine like garlands, we, in the innocence of our youth, with a sympathetic wonderment where a little admiration mixed, we remained for a long time thus, watching the good drunkard sleep. La Sempiterne possessed as her only fortune a goat which she sold the milk of during the season, and good people left it to be fed, as alms, on the scanty grass by the field's edge, as well as on the tresses of their hedges. From time to time, too, to earn a few poor days' worth, she would go wash laundry at Cranlin Fountain, where fairies return. It is a water that bursts forth at the bottom of the slopes, beneath a mossy stone, and then spreads out as a clear sheet in the shadow of 13 lime trees. One day, it was last year around this time, when the hawthorn is flowered, and when the yew begins to blanch on the bushes, the Sempiterne had a surprise. In this solitary place where fear keeps the world at bay, next to the mossy stone, a beautiful lady sat, her face so white with such fine golden hair that the Sempiterne stopped, taking her for at least a fairy. But a little boy was playing near her, and the Sempiterne understood that it could not be a fairy, because fairies have no children. But while she was washing without saying a word, she would sometimes raise her head and look mischievously at the beautiful lady and her boy. So, having tied the goat to the edge of the water goats, as is known, are fond of cress and mint, and these herbs make their milk taste good, she dipped her laundry and sat a little further down, yet still above her usual spot, to not disturb the beautiful lady. Sometimes, when he got too close, the goat would tug on its rope and lower its head, threatening. The lady was reading a book, to the great astonishment of the Sempiterne, who had never seen such behavior except from the priest. The boy, wanting to get to know the goat, had crossed the stream where the fountain flowed. Then the boy would run away, scared but happy to be afraid. Running like that, he fell. "Henrique! Henrique!" cried the beautiful lady. But already the old Sempiterne had risen, picking up the child while threatening the goat with her bat. "Ah, the heathen! Ah, the heartless one! It's the devil in his horns, this beast. Shame on you! Don't you have any shame in scaring that little one like this?" The goat listened to the speech. Henrique, amazed and no longer afraid of anything, dared to stroke the hairs of his beard. However, the beautiful lady asked if it would be possible, in the morning, to bring Henrique a glass of milk to the hamlet of Hautefeuille. "Not before a month, just. First, the goat must give birth, but as soon as the kid is weaned, we will keep the milk for you." From that moment on, Henrique became great friends with old Sempiterne and her goat. He would meet them every day on his way to the fountain. But it was something quite different when the goat gave birth and her kid followed her. Henrique would hold the kid in his arms. He would suckle from the udder just like him, and the goat allowed him to do so. So much so that after 5 months, when October announced winter, the lady spoke of returning to Paris. Henrique cried so much that it was necessary to take the goat, the kid, and Sempiterne as well. Terrified by the noise of the carriages and the bustling of this great city where, every day that the sun shines, everyone is dressed in Sunday best, the good old Sempiterne had first wanted to leave. "There are too many houses and not enough trees." And she concluded with her favorite phrase, All of this is the devil and his horns. Then, at night, when she looked out her attic window at the thousands of gleaming gas lamps like stars, she thought, people here are crazy for sure, to waste their oil like this. A vague but convenient formula that serves to express the most diverse sensations. Little by little, however, Sempitern grew accustomed to it. She learned the way around the streets. Luxembourg Gardens, the Tuileries, the trees along the quays and squares reconciled her with Paris. And now she alone walks Henriquet for a stroll, regretting, in view of the flower beds always in bloom and the well-watered lawns, that she cannot also take there the goat and kid prisoners in a corner of a small garden. And it's time to go to sleep. She is happy, the eternal one. Henriquet calls her Mama Gogyo, and would not trade her for any better-dressed nanny with ribbons from her hat so long that they drag on the ground and golden balls in her hair, that dry peasant woman as hard as wood, wrinkled like a vine branch, whose skin smells of earth and grass, and who tells her such beautiful stories in the evening. For her, at more than 60 years old, it's a childhood that begins again, as bright, as magical as the first was sad and gloomy. One day they took her to the theater, and immediately she signed herself, believing she was entering a church. In the acclimatation garden, in the plant garden where her Henriquet walks, she has naive terrors of strange country beasts, and great joy in recognizing a bush, a flower that she names with her rustic name. All this, without a doubt, is for Henriquet, but she benefits from it more than him. If you had seen her last afternoon in front of the Polichinelle booth, sometimes everyone is not perfect, and old people become children again when she buys a cake for Henriquet. It happens that she cuts off a little piece with the tips of her fingers and enjoys the scraps. He went. The play had an enormous success. The heroic and fierce hunchback was frisking around, hitting, babbling, and knocking out the commissioner, and there were bursts of laughter every time a strong trick resounded against a wooden skull. But in the childlike audience, no one, not even Henriquet, was having as much fun, be assured, as the old good woman, clapping her rough hands and with tears of joy shining in her eyes wrinkled, small, and clear. Mew, ew. But spring has returned. We are going back to Lucency in 8 days. Henriquet dreams about it at night. He sees himself bare-legged in the tall grass, with the goat and the kid, near the Cranlin fountain where the fairies return. The Sempitern is also happy. Poor Sempitern. Very happy, but his happiness does not come without regrets. You see, your great Paris is almost the devil with his horns. Still, if I had to, I would well get used to dying there. The Calypso, how memories press upon us from Christmas to Epiphany. For 2 weeks, even the most skeptical souls become childlike. And it is this that leads me to ask, dear reader, if you have personally known Saint Sylvester. For I knew this illustrious saint in the happy days of youth, when we would stroll down the streets, carrying on our backs the classic school bag, a library and pantry combined, which, when swung around at the end of its strap, also served as a weapon in the epic battles we would have with fellow youngsters from rival neighborhoods. Invisible for most of the time, Saint Sylvester, or whoever we thought he was, would regularly appear, arriving from unknown lands, on the very morning of his feast day, wearing large clogs, mittened hands, and wrapped in an ample and heavy cloak, as he untied a donkey from a cart. And whatever the time of day, whether snow was falling in flakes or the cold air split the stones, we were certain, having arrived first on the deserted square where the fountain flowed noiselessly, with icicles hanging from the lions' muzzles along which water glided silently, that we would find an old little man with keen eyes and a thick beard. Tea delighted our eyes. The donkey having detached itself, the cart was balanced on the fork of its chambermaid. Our man then successively extracted 2 sets of stools, boards, stakes, and a sailcloth. Next, improvising a kind of shop, he spread out in a beautiful order, with meticulous care, all sorts of toys that, by their barbarous shapes and violent colorations, furs, of white wood and turpentine. There were blue horses there similar to the one about which Emile Pouvillon told the touching story. There were those red violins that did not disdain to celebrate the very great writer who is called Théodore de Bonneville. There were cardboard dolls, shapeless trunks, without legs or arms, but within which a dry pea moves, symbolizing the soul and I.e. in a sufficiently significant way for the fresh imagination of young minds. There's the frog jumping on a twisted violin string like a crossbow spring, blacksmiths hammering the anvil with the hieratic stiffness of cackling gods, and drums and trumpets and primitive windmills, all freshly polished, slick to the touch, exuding a pleasant smell. However, little by little, the square began to fill. One stood there, eyes widened by greed, calculating what the fat bills and white Christmas coins would allow to be bought the next day. Bless sea, where ships sail. In any case, we were no longer alone, noses frozen and feet in the snow, around the dazzling shop. Peasants and peasant women arrived, bringing eggs, cheese, honey, winter fruits, and meager vegetables. And before the old communal house, beneath the time-worn escutcheons of the consoles, the vendors spread out on a bed of dripping seaweed mussels, clams, sea urchins with their spines quivering, sardines reflecting nacre and silver, a massive tuna, bleeding from its gill slits, and all sorts of miraculous fish that made us for a moment forget Saint Sylvester to evoke in our minds, as poor little half-wild mountain dwellers, the image of fantastical Marseille, glimpsed in the distant blue of Fan, dreams with its tall buildings, theaters, wide streets, waters sprouting from its squares, and the bound, "Make way, little ones," Ewan, only by those who play it, and which seems to have been invented especially for these poor people whose lives unfold contemplatively in the solitude of the mountains. Saint Sylvester sold them, always smiling, not talking much, and when he did speak, one noticed a slight accent from the country of Auvergne in his voice. Whether this was the true Saint Sylvester, no one among us doubted, and we made room for a villager trading horsehair rings for his friend, a farmhand, a shepherd trying out a series of pipes before he let loose the 5 sous, playing all the airs from his repertoire, or making the iron blade of a zither vibrate between his teeth, with ecstatic poses on instrument that causes stomach pain and is subjective, heard. I still believe it today. Day and white like a major road, winds among the stars. We loved and took care of these naive toys, preferable certainly to those made today, not by saints, but by very learned people. An indisputable fact is that, once New Year's Day is past, this strange saint with an Auvergnat accent disappears just as he arrived, leaving no trace, and we then imagined that he had returned to the heavens, behind the clouds, ascending in his carriage and donkey through the Milky Way, or, if you prefer, along the Camino de Santiago, which the family preserved them, and I remember old ones that were only shown to children on special occasions. Sometimes, one in particular, a kaleidoscope, the only one that existed in the town, which Cousin Anatole, the children of the village, for some reason, called this kind elderly lady Cousin Annette possessed. What beautiful things were inside, to be admired from afar with no permission to touch. Rarely, Cousin Annette would agree to put the key in an antique closed table, whose 2 leaves, when opening, would suddenly release a penetrating scent of past times. Broached fabrics, feathered ribbons, lace carefully yellowed by age, delicate scale fans, ancient jewelry, I could go on. Ear-sheep and shepherdesses, across fields and valleys, purses adorned with pearls, reliquaries shaped like hearts with tiny white bones framed within, held together with some gum, surrounded by golden paper arabesques, sweetmeat boxes made from bergamot leather, and other boxes covered in bulging glasses beneath which, carved into wax, gallant shepherds strolled through imaginary landscapes, alongside thee. Nevertheless, the ever-new wonder was still the kaleidoscope. And these small things of old, so in harmony with the sorrowfully charming countenance of Cousin Annette and the furnishing of this silent house, barely illuminated, where for 60 years no new object had entered, inspired a confused feeling of admiration and respect. Where did it come from? Who did Cousin Annette get it from? It doesn't matter. But I see it as it was, with its cardboard case covered in a paper with faded embossings. I think I hear the tiny, crisp sound that the beads, feathers, and fragments of red and shiny glass made, like grape seeds, every time they rearranged themselves. We understood nothing of the miracle, and our joy mingled with a little mysterious terror. Holding our breath one after another, with our eyes pressed to the lens, we admired as they were born, died, and were reborn again while the case spun. These countless figures similar to those seen floating in dreams. I thought the kaleidoscope vanished. Alas! With the blue horses, red violins, jumping frogs, and varnished wooden blacksmiths. Well, no, this year chance reserved me the surprise. I bought some that achieved. The witnesses are there. The other day, in broad daylight between a spring-engine merchant and a dealer in Bulgarian cries, I believed to recognize, was I not mistaken, my old kaleidoscope, not 1 but 50, even 100, an entire stock of kaleidoscopes. I was not mistaken. It was indeed the same, with the same ancient paper brightened by a wave of gold and inside the same capricious and fleeting designs. A fine success in the New Year gifts. I should have stripped the shop bare. For returning the next day to replenish my supply, I found the place empty. St. Silvestratus merchant could only be my St. Sylvester had disappeared on New Year's Day, as was his custom. And now, no doubt with the cart and donkey, he is returning a good tinsmith crowned with an aureolito his stores in heaven by the path of St. James that winds up there, among the stars, wide and white like a major road. Jean Meehan at the turn of the road, before reaching the village, a dozen hives lined up. Let's get closer to see if the good sun shining under this rock, in this valley hollow, hasn't woken up the bees. I noticed then that all the hives were bound with a strip of crepe, and concluded, knowing the custom, that there had been a death in the house. I questioned her. An old woman passed by, bent beneath her load of litter. She told me, "It's for Jean Meehan that the bells have rung. Since yesterday he has been waiting for us." And with a gesture of her hand, drear than the boxwood of her charge, she showed me on the hillside the low, white wall of the cemetery. John Meehan? But I knew him, John Meehan. A man from an earlier time, entirely old-fashioned. He was the last one to know the old airs. A ministrier in his idle moments, John Meehan made the Vogues dance for a long time. And suddenly, I remembered him as I had often seen him, a schoolboy, with his white hat, his knickers buttoned with a large boxwood button like a small shield, his short coat with a high collar, in burl cloth the color of an animal, and his striped crape vest in which he liked to stick his fists. Once removed, the piston horn and clarinet came, and the country no longer heard the tambourine snore or the pipe chirp, which sounded like a dispute between a cicada and a nightingale. John Meehan was repentant, but he held a grudge against the priests. How many times haven't I seen him at the processions, that small man, stumbling barefoot through the snow under the weight of the large crucifix, while his hood, raised, revealed a shaven chin, a huge nose, all dripping with sweat, and two black, pleated, and lively eyes. And all under the pretext that the money collected was used twice a year among colleagues for what is called a good meal. Father Gravas, a revolutionary enemy of good traditions, hadn't had the old, shining oak bench removed from the entrance to the church, where, from time immemorial, good penitents sold squares of oil cake to children for a sou each Sunday. For Jean Meehan, like all artisans and people of small trades at his time, enjoyed a fine peace. For nothing in the world would he have been prevented from going, at 5 o'clock sharp, to the chambrette, drinking a glass with friends, nibbling on some almonds, or, if worse came to worst, crunching a grain of grey salt that made the wine taste good. You then had a liter of peasant wine for next to nothing, pleasant to look at and smelling of grapes. These patriarchal excesses could not harm either your purse or your stomach. Jean Meehan also did not mind treating himself to a share of the Bastidon once in a while, on a Sunday or during the week. Istance in this world and pitied the fate of the rich, especially in winter, when the green jacinths peeked through the fallen leaves to catch a glimpse of the sun. When it came to the Bastidon, Jean Meehan was unyielding. After lunch, sitting in front of the door, we watched the young wheat gleam and shimmer in the breeze, marveling at the charms of the blessed season when all things sprout and grow under God's grace, while man rests, and, with philosophy, intertwined philosophy always intertwines when there's a hint of muscat in one's mind, we celebrated our ex. One day, his friend Tonnen Sain Fiesque, the cobbler, made a serious resolution. The Bastidon was sacred to him, more so than his tambourine, his church bench, or Notre Dame dressed in brocade, adorned with fake gold jewelry, and on Ascension Day, decorated with new apples, grapes, and cherries carried on a stretcher through Thea, town by penitence, under which grandmothers would pass us to make us grow tall and strong. But that very day, precisely, it was about eating a dozen juniper-flavored thrushes. Shaken the night before by his housekeeper, he had taken up his workbench at dawn and claimed to be working tirelessly until evening on a pair of shoes that needed finishing. To eat them without Tonnen? Impossible. And Tonnen, faithful to his word, did not want to give in. "Come now, Tonnen, be reasonable. The thrushes are waiting and your shoes will wait too. You can finish them tomorrow. The mother of all days is not dead." "I can't," answered Tonnen. "And why can't you?" "Why? A firework. Because I've bought myself a firework this morning, and I need to enjoy it." Indeed, in the middle of the shop, one could see a brassiere where blue almond shells taken from the baker's oven were burning. The other workmen weakened, defeated by the strength of the argument, and Tonnen left his shoes behind. Tonnen went to eat the thrushes. But Jean Meehan, a man of energy, searched his pockets. "Here is your coin of fire." His conscience was at peace. No one had anything more to say. He was paid for his coin of fire. Jean Meehan could thus be generous. His means allowed it. 3 pence per head plus the manure. That makes money at the end of the year. So Jean Meehan was considered rich. No one knew the fortune of Jean Meehan. 3 weeks ago, Master Trabicat, the notary, was smoking a pipe in front of his door when he saw Jean Meehan arrive. With his olive tree and vine, Jean Meehan also owned a vast stable as big as a church, where, on market days, he stored for a fee the donkeys and mules of the villagers who did not want to go to the inn. God be with you. May it be the same for you. But what bad wind brings you? There it is. I'm getting old, losing my memory, and at my age, one makes a mistake by keeping their money at home. Jean Meehan put one of those woven straw baskets into the notary's hands, which the locals use to feed their animals. But this isn't money, it's oats. It's money, too. Everything is mixed together. You'll sort it out. I trust you. Jean Meehan left. The notary took his witnesses, and as the breeze was good, they carefully began to fan oat and coin in the middle of the street. Jean Meehan had foreseen his end. He made it edifying. The oat flew away, and instead of good grain, gold coins fell into the sifter at the bottom. Knowing him sick, Father Graves, despite their disagreements, felt he should visit him. Jean Meehan didn't hold a grudge. They reconciled. The neighborhood followed behind. The next day, Father Graves arrived, preceded by his clerk dressed in red, who rang the bell, and 2 devotees carrying lanterns. Then, little by little, Father Graves confessed Jean Meehan and suggested, since the opportunity arose, that he would bring the Lord to him. Bring the Lord, for I am going to stay with him one of these mornings. It is only polite that we get to know each other. They entered, drew the curtains of the alcove. I came to administer to Jean Meehan and find an old woman in his bed. Father Graves approached, speaking in Latin, but suddenly recoiled in horror. What is all this? This is how Jean Meehan expired, wearing a pipe on his head and a neat white knot under his chin. It is indeed John Meehan. A sinner, replied one of the women, Jean Meehan himself, Mr. Curate, adding with respect, since you are coming with the Lord, we thought, for more politeness, to put this white-pressed woman's bonnet on him. Now Jean Meehan sleeps among the lavender, with his bees mourning him. And I wanted, why not, to write the funeral oration for this brave man who, never having done harm to anyone, lived happily and died peacefully in the place where Providence had planted him. The man with the knife bareheaded and armed, he sometimes crossed the town with his apron, his bloody clogs, and his gleaming large knife. Districts. Always around him there arose an assorting and lamentable concert. But whether he led away, with a rope around his neck, some poor condemned beast, or whether he found it dead one morning in the straw of the stable, rigid on his low cart with full wheels, drawn by a hairy donkey, he returned to sell the fresh skin, with damp hairs and nacre underside, to the tanners of the AOL. For from Double Gate to Painted Gate, the city dogs, suddenly excited by the smell of massacre that the man carried with him, would rush at him, barking, without daring to bite him. They called him Charlotte Plain, or, in a way ironic, Monsieur Charlotte. For us other children he was the man with the knife, the flayrose, and his knife terrified us. Charlotte lived under the ramparts near the shore, where his executions took place, in a dilapidated hovel that had once been a mill. Water no longer reached there for a long time. The old canal, slowly choked with lime, had become a garden where Charla occasionally cultivated flowers, fruit trees, and vegetables, domed in front of the door. And nothing in that solitary building, now separated from the wandering riverbed by a stretch of pebbles where thin osier bushes and sea buckthorns grew here and there, would have suggested the former mill, without the antique wheel 3/4, choked with mud, whose rotted wood had turned into kindling, and without a stone millstone lying aban. But never, during the training of our patrols, would we have considered touching Charlotte's fruit, let alone insulting her from a distance or speaking to Caroline. In spring, the trees in the garden were covered with peaches, golden apricots, and cherries that attracted flocks of birds, and often when we passed by, there would be a girl our age, sitting on the millstone. Caroline, who had never known her mother and never known her mother, was Charlotte's daughter. A bit witchy, half-ogre, we imagined that Caroline ate donkey meat on Fridays. Legends surrounded her father, whose grandfather was said to be a hangman. Why, this morning, seeing the paths covered in snow, did I remember Charlotte? So we took long detours on school days when we truanted, to avoid the sinister strike filled with blanched bones, skulls with oversized teeth, where always some flesh could be seen cooking in the sun, and large crows from the rocks swooped down with a heavy mechanical flight. The miller's cottage did not belong to Charlotte. And why did the memory return to me at the same time as a picturesque ceremony, of which that philosopher, who under macabre appearances hid, it seems, a good-natured soul inclined to joy, was the organizer and hero? Their age, a golden apple twig, very tall, served him as a sword. Immemorially, he and the other Charlottes, his ancestors, held it on lease from a noble family of the land, then represented by a gentle maniac known as the old Marquis. And that old Marquis, with his slouching physiognomy, the originality of his costume, appears to me through my memory sand at least as much as the brave Charlotte as a survivor of Anno. Living alone, despite being 90 years old, alone with his farmers, and not far from the city, on a farm decorated with the name of Chateau, around 1850, the old Marquis still proudly wore, without anyone being surprised, the short breeches, the tricorn hat, and the queue. This was the only concession he deigned to make to the ideas of time. Of little importance. Had he truly found the original lease among the dusty parchments in his chart-room, or did he invent its text to taunt, in Charlotte's person, the city's Republicans? "The devil takes it," said Charlotte. "Let him increase it if he wants. I'll be off the hook for not paying." But the fact is that year, the old Marquis had his tenant, astonished, served through a bailiff that henceforth, in addition to some acres collected up to then as homage and rent, he was to provide 6 pounds of fresh fish brought to the castle, before lunch, on the morning of mid-Lent. Jos. But where does he expect me to procure 6 pounds of fresh fish at a fixed time in the middle of winter? The Marquis would not budge. "I demand my fish for principle." These fish perpetuate the memory of the time when my ancestors alone, between the 2 bridges, had the right to fish in the river. Let Charlotte sort it out. I need my 6 pounds of fresh fish at mid-Lent. The Marquis said, "Fresh poisons." It was a joy in the city when one knew the feudal demands of the old Marquis. 6 pounds of fine, fresh poisons. A masquerade, a triumph. And the joy was double, as mid-Lent approached, when one learned that Charlotte was meditating a coup, and seriously affirmed he wanted to deliver his dues in person. On a day like this we played near the painted gateway, happy with the snow and cold that made the country white, putting pom-poms on bushes and silver beards on the bronze lions of the grand fountain. Suddenly, a din arose, dogs barking and wheels rumbling. It was Charlotte, the skin and bones, passing under the arch with his hideous cart. Charlotte, in his workman's garb, with a knife at his belt and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, was about to pay homage to the old Marquis. People followed. We followed them. What would the old Marquis say? Proud of his dog's music, enhanced for the occasion by a dozen polisons blowing, making his eyes water, in these enormous marine conches that replace our book-horns, Charlotte led his shaggy donkey by the bridle, while in the chariot, sitting on a board across, Caroline, sad yet beautiful as ever, held a basket of fish and a scale. The Marquis did not get angry. "Charlotte!" Standing at the top of the porch with his hand on his big cane, "Sardabois!" he exclaimed, "you are exaggerating your respect, and nothing indeed compelled you to bring the fish in such magnificent style." Then he signaled Caroline to come closer. Caroline, all red with her basket and scales. She gave him a white coin and paternally kissed him. Yes, the old Marquis, lifting her from the ground in his trembling hands, kissed Caroline. Great astonishment. A Marquis kissing Caroline. The shells fell silent suddenly, the dogs remained quiet, and the onlookers who had followed, come to laugh, did not laugh much. Our ideas were turned upside down for 8 days. The following year, to my great regret, as the old Marquis had died in the meantime, the tribute of the fish was not renewed. But since goodness here below is not a seed that perishes, thanks to the Marquis, Charlotte has made us less afraid. The deputy's Christmas deputy? Sometimes they would play with Caroline. And it was she who, in the season of fruits, when we stuffed our mouths and pockets with stolen cherries without any more prejudices now, spied, climbing onto the old wheel so her father wouldn't catch us. "Meow! Do you want to be a deputy?" It was yesterday, no farther back, that political ambition came to me. It was yesterday that this idea entered my head, banging against the walls and buzzing with the tenacity of a woodlouse trying to break a window. Hey! But after all, being a deputy seems pleasant. Why, like so many others, shouldn't I let myself be named a deputy? Not that I particularly like the job itself. Take a break at the snack bar, a trellised bamboo haven where one smokes excellent 2-cent cigars made by the agency specifically for lawmakers, just as tasty as London ones. Go to the Palais Bourbon at the same time every day, surrounded by a double hedge of onlookers admiring. cross the hall of lost steps with an air of depth under the watchful eyes of narcissistic journalists, and instead of joining the commission, calling for you or attending the upcoming session, and the provincial solicitors grinding outside the door, travel through your constituency in a rental car, observe the farmer working, straighten up against the clear sky to wave from afar or show a fist, depending on whether he is or isn't your supporter, and in Paris, in salons where delicious snails are, peeling off to discuss politics. Ye most illustrious, all this, certainly, constitutes highly enviable privileges. Within a pile of breasts less hypothetical and more yielding than the famous breast of this assembly, to be celebrated, surrounded, pressed, and audaciously hogging the tributes hitherto reserved solely for pianists and poets, to see one's name, mentioned in the newspapers, until its obscurity is relished, your small provincial name alongside the... Yet it would not have tempted me, being of the race of singing birds who prefer the shelter of a bush where they will remain, once their branches stripped, with some berries of a beautiful crimson that, softened by the frost, will help to see out the winter. But this morning, the deputy appeared to me in a new light, and for all the troubles, I would condemn myself, God damn me, to legislate for 11 months and half for the right to exercise a week or two of these so charming and patriarchal duties. The few shops there retain the honest air of yesteryear's shops. I live, as you know, on the other side of the Seine, in a quiet neighborhood loved by scholars and thrushes, where, among grand hotels inscribed with heraldic names in a cartouche, stands an old tree contemporary with Louis XIV and Versailles. The legislative body is not far away, and some deputies there are. Few cars stray there, and if one does pass occasionally, the coachman, intimidated by the majesty of these trees and the silence of these closed houses, slows down and gives his cart the air of a court carriage, dense with 900 francs per month allowance, indulging in reading and dominoes in cafes where familiar and respectful waiters offer the review, who refuse to be drawn into the maelstrom, whose formidable funnel gyrates around the stock exchange, not only having been initiated at 50 years old to the splendors of high society, but some members confine themselves there, modest in a small circle of habits, living in a furnished house, dining at an inn, and in the evenings, like aged stuff, happy, giggling, with a dozen little boxes tied with blue and pink favors. He notices me. I greet him. So yesterday, near my home, I met one of these deputies, no longer grave, and with a forehead clouded by all the cares of power, without having under his arm the indispensable portfolio stuffed with reports and plans, schoolhouses or bridges to be built, secondary roads to be straightened, Roman churches that should be covered with tiles, but smart. Where to? Time to drop this off at the hotel, he says, and if you have nothing better to do, I'll take you in a carriage. Oh, damn, to go buy more boxes. I'm not used to shops. You, as a Parisian, will help me choose. The chamber will sort itself out. Once in the carriage, my deputy confided that with the credits voted, he had decided, as he did every year, to advance his departure by a few days without waiting for the regular holidays. As soon as this evening I leave Paris. Here comes Christmas, and I cannot do otherwise than be there for Christmas. See, rather, he had taken out a letter. He was reading it to me. Mr. Deputy, we write to you at this time solely to cause you a slight inconvenience. When coming to spend the holidays in Cantoperdrix, we would be obliged if you could bring us a little magic lantern, one of those inexpensive ones for which you will find the amount attached in postal stamps. In years. Oh, Warma. Magic lanterns are only well made in Paris, and we have promised our little Marius a surprise for his Christmas, as he always remembers you and counts on your protection, Mr. Deputy, when in 15 years' time he presents himself at St. Cyr. How could I refuse this service to brave people who imagine that I will still represent them in 50? And this letter is not the only one. Here, in alphabetical order, is the series of committees they have tasked me with, continued my deputy, unrolling a list longer than that of Don Juan's lovers. Grumbling and sighing, my deputy swam in joy. Darned profession. In the meantime, stopping the carriage at the door of a bazaar or candy store, we piled on our knees and on the bench the cheap candy cones, frilled in silver or gold paper and decorated with naive chromolithographs, the old-fashioned pastils where melted sugar, spun, kneaded and colored by skilled hands, becomes a beautiful relief landscape in Hick characters clad in gummed clothes stroll. Not to mention the puppet shows, dolls, barking dogs, bleating lambs, braying donkeys, mooing cows, trumpets and drums, wooden sabers, straw pistols, lead soldiers painted with barbaric colors, rabbit fur lions, and drum-beating rabbits given a devilish look by 2 nails as eyes. He cried out, But here's what will make me forgiven: many a tobacco shop that I did not obtain despite my efforts at the ministries. And I, to be honest, with a heart gnawed by a base envy, was jealous of my deputy's joy. To see if he arrives, I thought to myself. Within 4 days in our small mountain villages that December will have dusted with snow, on the white street which will be brightened by the glow of chimneys and hearths, reflecting red through the windows, the children will wait for the promised deputy, and passing the last house they will head down the path, into the field. Will bless this deputy, and they will envision him in a ray of glory, with a white beard, clogs, a limousine gleaming with frost, hands full, smiling, and bundled up like Santa Claus from the tales. And on the night of the grand feast, during dessert, when, doused in 100-year-old wine, the calendar log will flame on the Ironlanders, when the claret bursts, corks flying, flooding the table with foam, and gifts are brought between the 3 lit candles and the 3 brown plates where the wheat begins to turn green, then the children. But actually, my friend concludes, here's an idea for a costume, much more significant and picturesque than today's sad black garb or the mortician coats once drawn by David for directors, representatives of the people, and the 500. Table of contents, the true temptation of St. Anthony, the pot of honey, retrospective Christmas. The good guidon, the gospel. I intend to bring this up in the assembly if I am elected, and propose that our MMPs dress in such a manner in their provinces at least once a year, when, setting politics aside, they become, like the excellent man whose story I just told you, deputies for the children during winter festivals. Lagny Printing, Press. According to St. Perrault Sylvaney's Easter Impressions of Holy Week Autumn Tale, the first Snowfall Winter Delights Winter Mail Happy Day Music's little pages, Moret and Perdiglet, A Diligent Hunter Villager's Retreat, A Funny Hunt the Lobster Free, A Funny Hunt the Lobster, The Blind Man's Dog, The Cat's the Good Drunkard, The Peasant Woman 1079, The Kaleidoscope 187, John Meehan, 195, The Man with the Knife 203, The Deputy's Christmas 211, Emil Collin,